"You're fired. Get out of my diner." Those 4 words hit Emma Whitmore harder than anything she had ever felt in her life, and she had felt a lot. She had buried her mother. She had watched her brother fight for his life in a hospital bed. She had worked double shifts with blisters on her feet and a smile on her face. But this was different. She lost her job because she gave a tired man a glass of water. And the man she helped, he was about to make the whole world pay attention. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The alarm went off at 4:15 in the morning, same as it always did. Emma Whitmore didn't groan. She didn't pull the blanket over her head the way most 25-year-olds might. She simply reached over, clicked it off, and lay still for exactly 3 seconds, which was all she ever allowed herself. 3 seconds to feel the weight of everything waiting for her. 3 seconds to breathe. And then she was up. She had a system. She had to. When you're holding a household together with both hands and a prayer, systems are what keep you from falling apart. She would brush her teeth, pull her blonde hair into a tight ponytail, check on her brother Ryan before leaving, make sure his medication was within reach on the nightstand, and be out the door by 4:45. Not 4:50, not 4:46, 4:45, because the bus to Riverside Corner Diner left at 5:02, and if she missed it, she'd have to walk 6 blocks in the cold, and she'd be late opening the coffee station, and David Collins would write her up again. David Collins loved writing people up. It made him feel like he mattered. Emma tied her apron strings in a double knot and stepped out into the dark. The morning air bit at her cheeks. November in their town didn't ease into the cold. It arrived like a demand, sudden and unapologetic. She tucked her chin into her jacket collar and kept her eyes forward. She had learned long ago that looking down too much on mornings like this made the weight feel heavier. Better to look straight ahead. Better to keep moving. The diner was already lit up when she arrived. She could see the warm glow of the interior lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Carl, the overnight dishwasher, had propped the back door open with a milk crate the way he always did. She slipped in, said good morning to him, tied on her second apron, the one she kept on the hook beside the walk-in cooler, and got to work. By 5:15, the coffee was running. By 5:30, the first regulars had started filtering in. Riverside Corner Diner wasn't a fancy place. It had 10 tables, a long counter with 8 stools, a pie case that only ever had 3 kinds of pie in it, regardless of what the chalkboard claimed, and fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly when the weather got humid. But it was warm. It smelled like coffee and bacon and something reliable. And reliability, Emma had come to understand, was its own kind of beautiful. She knew the regulars by name, by order, and by mood. She knew that Frank Delgado always wanted his eggs scrambled dry, but would never actually say so, and would just push the wet ones around his plate in the silent disappointment unless she got it right. She knew that Helen Park drank decaf, but told herself it was regular because she believed the ritual of it mattered more than the caffeine. She knew that the 2 retired postal workers who came in every Tuesday and Thursday would argue about baseball for 20 minutes and then laugh so hard one of them nearly choked, and that she should always have extra napkins ready for that moment. Emma didn't just take orders. She paid attention. That was the thing about her that people noticed, though they rarely said it out loud. She paid attention to people as if they were worth paying attention to. As if every single person who walked through that door carried something real inside them, something that deserved to be seen. Her father had taught her that. Robert Whitmore had worked his whole life in a factory that made him feel invisible, and he had refused to pass that feeling on to his children. Emma, he had told her once when she was maybe 9 years old, and they were sitting on the back porch watching fireflies. The only measure of a person that matters is how they treat someone who can't do anything for them. You remember that? She had remembered it. She had carried it into every single shift, every table, every cup of coffee she poured, even on the mornings when her feet hurt and her eyes burned, and she had barely slept because Ryan had a rough night and kept waking up in pain. She carried it because it was the last real piece of him she had left. The morning started the way mornings usually did, busy enough to keep her moving, manageable enough that she could keep everything under control. David Collins arrived at 7 sharp, same as always, and immediately began walking the floor with the air of a man performing an inspection of his own importance. He straightened napkin holders that didn't need straightening. He picked up menus that were perfectly fine and stacked them with unnecessary precision. He nodded at customers as if their presence was something he was generously permitting. Emma stayed out of his way. That was also part of her system. It was around 8:15 when the door opened and the entire atmosphere in the diner shifted. She didn't hear a bell. She didn't hear dramatic music. She just heard the creak of the hinges, the same creak she had heard 1,000 times, and looked up the way she always did when a new customer came in. And she saw him. He was a big man, not just tall, but built the way certain men are built who have spent decades in physical work or physical conflict, or both. He wore a leather vest covered in patches, and even from across the diner, Emma could see the central patch clearly enough to know what it meant. Hell's Angels, patches on both sides of the chest, a bottom rocker with a location, more patches along the front and back that she couldn't read but that told a story by their density alone. His beard was gray and brown mixed together, trimmed but not neat. His face was deeply lined, not in a soft way, but in the way that comes from years of weather and decision and consequence. He stood at the entrance for a moment, just a moment, and that was enough. Emma watched it happen in slow motion. The couple at table 3, a young pair probably on their way to work, both glanced up and then deliberately looked back down at their phones. The man at the counter, a middle-aged guy she didn't recognize, picked up his coffee mug and shifted his body almost imperceptibly away from the door. Helen Park stopped mid-sentence and reached for her purse. Not because she was leaving, just because she wanted it closer. The whole room contracted around itself. But Emma watched the man and she saw something that none of them were seeing because none of them were actually looking. He was holding himself too carefully. There was something about the way he was standing, slightly tilted, the weight distributed, in a way that wasn't natural, his right hand resting on the doorframe just a second longer than it needed to. A person who was a threat didn't stand like that. A person who was a threat held their body differently. This man was holding his body like someone trying not to fall down in public. Like someone running on empty and sheer force of will. He was exhausted. More than that, he was hurting. Emma picked up a menu and walked toward him. She didn't think about it. She didn't pause to consider the optics. She just moved the way she always moved toward anyone who walked in the door. "Good morning," she said. "Just you today." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not suspicious exactly, more like cautious, like a man who had been surprised before by how quickly a situation could turn. "Just me," he said. His voice was low and rough-edged but not unkind. "Counter or table?" "Table, if that's all right." "That's what they're here for," she said, and she meant it without any edge in her voice, and she could see the small flicker of something recognition, maybe a relief that crossed his face. She led him to the table in the far corner. Not because she was trying to hide him away, because the corner table was the quietest one furthest from the doordraft, and something in her registered without quite articulating it that this man needed to be somewhere quiet. He lowered himself into the chair carefully, the kind of careful that was practiced, the kind that meant sitting down hurt. She set the menu in front of him and he glanced at it but didn't really look at it. His eyes were doing that distant thing that eyes did when a person was operating on reserves they didn't have. "I'm Emma," she said. "I'll let you look this over. Can I bring you something while you decide? Coffee, water?" "Water would be good," he said. "Please." That please. She noted it. It wasn't performed. It wasn't aggressive politeness trying to compensate for something. It was just a word used simply, and that simplicity told her more than a paragraph of explanation would have. She brought him a full glass of water and a second one without being asked. He drank the first one almost immediately, and she could see the slight involuntary closing of his eyes as the cold hit him, like his body was recognizing something it had been waiting for. She refilled the glass without a word. She gave him time. She went to her other tables, checked on Frank's eggs, refilled Helen's decaf, and let the man in the corner breathe. She didn't hover. She didn't rush him. When she came back 5 minutes later, he had the menu closed in front of him and his hands folded on top of it, and something about the gesture reminded her oddly of a man sitting down for a church service, as if he was trying to gather himself. "What can I get you?" she asked. He hesitated, just briefly, but she caught it. "Coffee," he said. "Black, and just the coffee for now." Emma looked at him. She didn't stare. She didn't make it into something larger than it was. But she looked at him the way her father had always looked at people, like they were worth a second of real attention. "Our special this morning is 2 eggs toast and bacon," she said. "Comes with home fries. Pretty decent." That sounds good, he said, but just the coffee today. She nodded, wrote it down, walked away. She was at the coffee station when she stopped moving entirely for exactly 5 seconds. She had $18 in her wallet. She had counted it that morning the way she counted it every morning. $17 and some change, actually. Her bus fare home was $1.50, which meant she did the math without meaning to the way she always did, $15 and some cents available. She thought about Ryan's face that morning, still soft from sleep, his breathing easier than it had been all week. She thought about the stack of bills on the kitchen counter that she had shuffled around for the past 3 weeks, pretending she could make the math work differently if she just looked at them from different angles. And then she thought about the man in the corner who had drunk 2 glasses of water, like he hadn't had water in a day, and was ordering only coffee because that was all he felt he could justify. Emma turned around. She went back to the window and called through to Pete in the kitchen. Pete, can you put in a number 3 for table 9 eggs, medium toast, white extra home fries? Pete looked at her. I don't have a ticket for that. I know, she said. I'm buying it. Pete opened his mouth and then closed it and then just said, sure, Emma, and turned back to the grill. She set the coffee down in front of the man and told him it would be a few minutes. He looked at the mug and then up at her. I only ordered coffee, he said. I know, she said, but you look like you haven't eaten, and the special's good today. It's on me. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped, if she'd read the situation wrong, if what she thought she'd seen in his eyes was something else entirely. Then he said very quietly, You don't know me. No, she agreed, but I know a person who needs a meal. Something moved through his expression, something deep and complicated that she didn't try to name. He looked down at his coffee cup and then back up at her and gave a single slow nod. Thank you, he said, 2 words. Quiet. But the weight behind them was enormous, and Emma felt it the way you feel a shift in temperature in your whole body, not just on your skin. She went back to her tables. She didn't notice David Collins watching. She should have noticed, but she was too busy doing her job. David Collins noticed everything, and the way he noticed things was through the lens of what they meant for him, for his control over the diner's atmosphere, for the image he believed the restaurant projected under his management. He had worked at Riverside Corner for 11 years, had been manager for 4 of them, and in those 4 years, he had cultivated a particular vision of the place. Clean, safe, predictable, the kind of diner that families came to, that couples felt comfortable in, that did not under his watch become the kind of place that people associated with anything uncomfortable. And a Hells Angels member sitting in the corner was to David Collins the definition of uncomfortable. He approached Emma at the coffee station. Table 9, he said, keeping his voice low. Who is that? A customer, Emma said. Don't be cute, you know what I mean. He came in, sat down, ordered coffee. He's a customer. David glanced toward the corner table and then back at her. He's making people uncomfortable. Look at the room. Emma looked at the room. The couple at table 3 had gone back to their phones. Helen Park was talking to her friend again. Frank was eating his eggs dry the way she'd gotten them right this morning. The man at the counter had finished his coffee and was pulling on his jacket to leave, but that might have been because he was done with his coffee, not because of anything else. The room looks fine to me, she said. Emma. David's voice dropped lower, took on the specific register he used when he wanted to signal that he was being serious without raising his voice. That man is a biker, a Hells Angels member. I need you to go tell him we're at capacity and ask him to finish up. Emma turned and looked at David Collins directly. We have 3 empty tables, she said. That's not the point. Then what is the point, David? He leaned in slightly. The point is that having someone like that sitting in the middle of this restaurant is bad for business. It makes people nervous. It changes the atmosphere. And my job is to maintain the atmosphere. Emma was quiet for a moment, a very careful kind of quiet. That man walked in cold and tired, and he sat down at a table and ordered coffee, she said. He said, please. He said, thank you. He has not done a single thing wrong. It doesn't matter. It does matter, she said, and she didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone shifted, became very clear and very still. It matters because if we're going to decide who gets to sit in this diner based on what they look like instead of how they behave, then we're not the kind of place I thought we were. David stared at her. His expression was doing something complicated, cycling between anger and dismissal, and the particular discomfort of a man who has just been told something uncomfortably true. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said. "Tell him to leave." "No," Emma said. The word fell between them like a stone. David's jaw tightened. "Then I'm telling you to go find somewhere else to work." She felt it, the physical impact of it in her chest, in her stomach, and somewhere behind her eyes. She had known it might come. Part of her had recognized the trajectory of this conversation from the moment David had approached her. But knowing something might happen and having it actually happen were entirely different experiences. She turned and looked at table 9. The man she didn't know his name yet, though she would learn it later, had been given his breakfast which Pete had sent out, and he was eating it. Quietly, methodically, like a person who had learned not to take food for granted. "He deserves to finish his meal," she said. "You're done here, Emma. I'll have your last check ready by Friday." She looked at David for a long moment. She thought about the bills on the kitchen counter. She thought about Ryan's medication. She thought about the bus fare home that she had calculated down to the exact coin. She thought about all the things that were about to become significantly harder. Then she thought about her father on the back porch watching fireflies, telling her the only measure of a person that matters is how they treat someone who can't do anything for them. She untied her apron. She folded it carefully the way she always did, the way she had done every single shift for the past 3 years. She set it on the counter beside the coffee station. She picked up her jacket from the hook by the back door, and then she did something she hadn't planned to do. She walked back to table 9. The man looked up at her. He read her face immediately. She could see him reading it, and his expression shifted into something watchful and grave. "I'm heading out," she said. "I just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed before I go." He looked at her apronless uniform. He looked at her jacket. He looked at the direction David Collins had disappeared toward the back office. "Did you just get fired?" he asked. Low, direct. She considered denying it. It took her about half a second to decide she wouldn't. "Yes," she said. His eyes were very steady on her. "Because of me. Because of a choice I made," she said. "That's different." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said very quietly, "What's your name?" "Emma," she said. "I'm Caleb," he said. Then after a pause like he was deciding something, he added, "Caleb Walker. People call me Stone." She nodded. "Nice to meet you, Caleb." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. She started to tell him the meal was on her, that he didn't need to worry about it, but he was already holding out 2 folded bills. "That's too much," she said without even looking at the amount. She could see it was too much. "No," he said, "it isn't." She took it because arguing with him felt wrong, felt like it would diminish something, and she wasn't sure what, but she knew enough not to. She said goodbye. She walked out through the front door because the front door was closer, and she needed the air, needed to be outside, needed to feel the cold hit her face and remind her that she was still standing, that she was still herself, that doing the right thing, even when it cost her, was still the right thing. She stood on the sidewalk outside Riverside Corner Diner and looked at the bills in her hand. $200. She almost dropped them. She stared at them for what felt like a long time. Then she looked back through the window and saw Caleb Walker still sitting at the corner table, hands wrapped around his coffee mug, looking like a man who had something to think about. She put the money in her pocket and started walking. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know that the man sitting at table 9 had already taken out his phone. She didn't know that his thumb was moving across the screen, typing words that would soon travel farther than she could have imagined. She didn't know any of it. She just walked and breathed and told herself she was going to be okay. She wasn't sure if she believed it yet, but she told herself anyway, because that's what you do when you're carrying things alone. You keep telling yourself you'll be okay, and you keep walking, and you hope that the distance between believing it and it being true isn't too far to cross. The walk home took 40 minutes. She didn't take the bus. She had the money now, obviously, but the walk felt necessary in a way she didn't question. Her mind needed the movement. Her body needed to do something while everything inside her worked through the morning. She kept replaying it, not with regret. She was very clear, even now, that she had no regret, but with that particular kind of processing that a mind does when a significant thing has just happened, when a line has been crossed that changes the landscape on the other side of it. She had a job. Now she didn't. She had a routine, a system, a predictability. Now she had none of those things. What she had was exactly $17, minus the 200, which felt too big to quite absorb yet, and a brother who needed medication and a stack of bills, and no idea what shift she would work tomorrow morning. She turned the key in the apartment door and stepped inside. Ryan was awake. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and his laptop open, and when he looked up at her face, he went very still. "What happened?" he said. Ryan was 22, 3 years younger than Emma, and he had their mother's dark eyes and their father's directness and a medical condition that had been the defining challenge of Emma's adult life, not because she resented him for it, not even a little, but because loving someone who is suffering is its own kind of sustained hard work. He had good days and bad days. Today appeared to be a reasonably good day. He was sitting up, which was always a positive sign. She sat down across from him. She didn't take her jacket off. She just sat down and put her hands flat on the table. "I got fired," she said. He stared at her. "What?" "This morning, a man came into the diner. Look, it doesn't matter exactly who he was. He needed help. I helped him. David didn't like it. He told me to make the customer leave. I wouldn't. So he fired me." Ryan kept staring at her. She could see him working through it the way he always worked through things methodically like their father. "What do you mean he needed help?" "He was exhausted and he hadn't eaten and he had nowhere to be warm for a few minutes, so I bought him breakfast." "You bought him breakfast with your own money?" "Yes." "Emma." "Ryan." He stopped, started again. "What kind of customer was it? Why would David fire you for that? He can't just—" "He was a biker," she said. "Hell's Angels." Silence. Ryan put his spoon down. "Emma," he said again, but differently this time. Not with frustration, with something more complicated. "He was tired," she said simply. "He was tired and hurting, and he needed a meal and someone to treat him like a human being. That's all I did. And David wanted me to throw him out, and I couldn't do that. I won't do that. Dad would have—" She stopped, breathed. "Dad would have done the same thing." Ryan was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I know he would have." They sat across from each other in the kitchen that smelled like coffee, in the particular familiar combination of their shared life, and Emma felt the weight of the morning settle fully onto her shoulders for the first time. "We're going to be okay," she said. Ryan looked at her steadily. "Tell me you believe that." She almost said yes immediately, then she stopped, because Ryan deserved honesty. He always had. "I'm working on it," she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. "Then work on it," he said. "We'll figure the rest out." She squeezed his hand and kept her face steady and calm. She was good at that. She had been good at that for a long time. But later, when Ryan had gone back to his room to rest and the apartment was quiet, Emma sat in the kitchen alone and looked at the $200 bills on the table. She thought about the man who had handed them to her without ceremony or drama or expectation. She thought about the way he said, "I'm Caleb," the way he said, "People call me Stone," like he was giving her something real, not a performance. She thought about what it must feel like to walk into a room and watch it close against you before you've done a single thing wrong. She thought about that, and she thought about her father, and she thought about what she had done that morning and whether it had been wise. Then she thought about whether wise was always the same thing as right. She decided that it wasn't. She picked up the money and put it in the envelope on the counter marked Ryan Meds, and she sat back down and she made a list. Because lists were what she had when everything else felt uncertain. Step 1, call the employment office. Step 2, look at the job boards. Step 3, figure out the next 2 weeks. Step 4, take it from there. She had no way of knowing that somewhere across town, Caleb Walker had sent a message that was already spreading through a network wider and deeper than she could have imagined. She had no way of knowing that her name was being passed from one phone to another, from one chapter to another, carried along on the specific frequency of men who understood something about being judged unfairly. She had no way of knowing that the story of a young blonde waitress who lost her job for giving a tired man a meal was becoming something larger than a story. She sat at her kitchen table with her list and her envelope of medical money, and she told herself again that she was going to be okay. And somewhere across the city, Caleb Walker was making sure she would be. She didn't sleep well that night. This wasn't unusual. Emma's sleep had never been deep or easy. Too many years of half listening for Ryan, Too many months of rolling numbers in her head like prayer beads, too many mornings with 4:15 alarms. But that night was different. That night she kept cycling back to the same moment, the moment of folding her apron and setting it on the counter, and knowing it was the last time. And each time she returned to it, her chest did something complicated. She wasn't second-guessing herself. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself in the privacy of her own 4 a.m. wakefulness. She would make the same choice again. She knew she would. The absolute clarity of that was actually the one thing she could hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. But clarity didn't pay bills. She lay there in the dark and thought about her father teaching her to do the right thing, and she wondered if he had understood the Gui when he taught her that lesson, and she decided he probably had, and that he had taught her anyway because he believed the cost was worth paying. She hoped she believed the same thing. By 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her list and added 3 more items to it that she thought of in the night. She didn't know that at approximately the same time in a different part of the city, Caleb Walker was on the phone. She spent the day being practical. She was good at practical. She called the unemployment office and navigated the automated system with the patience of someone who had navigated many automated systems before and knew that patience was the only weapon available against them. She updated her resume on the old laptop that took 8 minutes to start up. She applied to 4 positions, 2 other diners, a hotel breakfast shift, a cafe near the community college. She cooked dinner, pasta because pasta was cheap and Ryan liked it, and cooking for him gave her hands something to do besides clench and unclench. She did not tell Ryan how scared she was. She told him about the job applications instead. She told him about the hotel one which had sounded promising in the listing. She made it sound more promising than it probably was. Ryan ate his pasta and told her about something he'd read that day, and they had a conversation that was almost entirely normal, and Emma was grateful for it more than she could say. After dinner, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She was tired, and she didn't recognize the area code, and she thought it might be a robocall. But some instinct, the same instinct that had made her walk toward Caleb Walker instead of away, made her pick it up. Is this Emma? A man's voice, rough-edged and direct. It is, she said carefully. My name's Dennis. I ride with the Hells Angels out of the East Side chapter. I heard what you did yesterday. I wanted to call and tell you what you did matters. I wanted you to know that. Emma sat down on the kitchen floor because her legs had done something unexpected. How do you, she started. Stone told us, he said simply. He told us what happened, what you did, what it cost you. She didn't know what to say. Stone doesn't talk a lot about things that affect him, Dennis said. When he does, people listen. I just wanted to call and say not every person would have done what you did. Most people don't, and I think you should know that. The call was maybe 4 minutes long. When it ended, Emma sat on the kitchen floor for a while longer. Then another number called, and another. By 8 o'clock that evening, she had received 11 calls from men she had never met, from area codes she didn't recognize, all of them saying variations of the same thing. They had heard about her. They wanted her to know that what she did mattered. Some of them were brief and gruff, and that gruffness itself was a kind of gentleness. Some of them talked longer, told her small pieces of their own stories about being judged, about what it meant to have one person see past the surface. Emma sat on the kitchen floor and cried quietly so Ryan wouldn't hear. Not because she was sad, because she was something she hadn't had room to be in a very long time. She was overwhelmed by kindness. After the last call, she sat there in the silence and thought about what her father had said, about how a small act of kindness traveled farther than you imagined. She had believed it as a principle. She was learning it now as a fact. She didn't know yet what was coming. She only knew that something had shifted, that she was not it, turned out standing alone. She got up off the floor. She washed her face. She went and checked on Ryan. Then she sat back down at the kitchen table with her list, and she added one more item at the very top above all the practical things. Remember that people surprised you today. She started twice. Then she turned off the light and went to bed, and this time for the first time in a long time she slept. The calls stopped just after 9 o'clock that night. Emma had counted them. 11 calls from 11 different men. She had never met, from cities she had never visited, all of them telling her that they had heard what she had done and that it mattered. She had written down every name because writing things down was how she processed them, how she made them real when they felt too large to hold in her head. Dennis, Marcus, Ray, Bobby, a man named Garrett who had a voice like gravel and who had said simply, "My sister waitresses. I hope somebody would do the same for her," and then hung up before she could respond. She had written them all down. She stared at the list. Then she folded it, put it in her jacket pocket next to the grocery receipt and the folded reminder about Ryan's next clinic appointment, and she went to bed. She slept, deeply for the first time in weeks. She didn't set her alarm. She had no job to wake up for. That thought landed differently in the morning than it had the night before. The night before it had been terrifying. In the morning, in the particular gray light that came through her curtains just before 7, it was simply a fact she needed to work with. She was good at working with facts. She got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. The hotel cafe job she had applied to hadn't responded yet, but one of the diners had a quick acknowledgement saying they would be in touch within the week. Within the week meant nothing. Within the week could mean 7 days, or it could mean they sent those automatically to everyone and never followed up. She knew this from experience. Ryan came out of his room at 8, moving slowly the way he did on mornings when the pain was sitting heavier than usual. He didn't say anything about it. He never did. He just moved more carefully and held things with both hands, and Emma registered all of it peripherally while keeping her expression exactly the same, because Ryan hated being watched for symptoms, and she respected that. "Any more calls last night?" he asked, pouring himself coffee. "No, 11 was the final count." He sat down across from her. "That's still 11 calls from strangers, Emma." "I know. That doesn't happen." "I know." He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at her across the table. "What do you think it means?" She thought about it honestly. "I think it means Caleb Walker told people what happened and it resonated with them. I think it means these are men who have been on the other side of that kind of judgment, and hearing about someone who acted differently, it meant something to them." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Do you think anything is going to come of it?" "Practically speaking, I don't know," she said. "I'm not counting on it. But," she looked at him, "but it reminded me of something." "What?" "That Dad was right," she said simply. Ryan didn't say anything to that. He just nodded slowly and they drank their coffee in the particular silence that exists between two people who share the same grief and the same inheritance and don't need to explain either one to each other. Her phone buzzed on the table. Not a call this time. A text. Unknown number. She picked it up. "Emma, it's Caleb. Stone, I want to talk to you if you're willing. I can meet wherever you're comfortable. No pressure either way." She read it twice. Then she looked up at Ryan. He was watching her. "Stone," she said. He set down his coffee. "The biker." "Yeah. What does he want? To talk?" She put the phone down, picked it up again, put it back down. "He says no pressure." Ryan studied her. "Are you going to meet him?" She thought about the man who had handed her $200 without hesitation. The man who had said thank you the way people say thank you when they mean it all the way down. The man who had made 11 phone calls happen across 2 time zones. "Yes," she said. She texted back, "I'm free this morning. There's a coffee shop on Birch Street a block from the library. Is that okay?" The response came in under a minute. "See you at 10. She told Ryan where she was going, and she told him to call her if he needed anything. He told her to stop treating him like he was fragile. She told him she wasn't treating him like he was fragile. She was treating him like he was her brother. He considered this and said fair enough. She got on the bus. Caleb Walker was already there when she arrived. He was sitting at a table in the back, same corner preference she had noticed in the diner, and he had 2 coffees in front of him. He had ordered for her without asking black, which was how she took it, and she didn't know if he'd guessed or if someone had told him. But either way, it was correct, and she noted that without attaching too much to it. He looked better than he had in the diner. Some of the particular exhaustion had lifted from his face. He was still a physically imposing man. She doubted that ever went away entirely, but the layer of depletion she had seen through was thinner now. He looked like a man who had slept and eaten and had somewhere to be. He stood when she came in. That surprised her. He waited until she sat down before he sat down. That surprised her even more. "Thank you for coming," he said. Thank you for the coffee, she said. She wrapped her hands around the mug the way Ryan did on hard mornings, not because she was cold, but because it was grounding. And for the other day, the $200. You didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to, he said. That's why I did it. She looked at him. How did you know I took black? Something shifted in his expression, the ghost of something almost like humor. I didn't, I guessed. You didn't seem like the kind of person who needed extra things in her coffee. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an observation. She decided it was both. I got calls last night, she said. 11 of them. From people in your... She paused, not sure of the right word, and he provided it without making it awkward. My family, he said. Your family, she repeated. She tested the word, found that it fit. They called to tell me that what I did mattered. He held her gaze. It did. Caleb, she set her coffee down. I gave you water and a meal. I've given a lot of people water and meals. I'm not saying that to diminish it. I'm saying it because I want you to understand I don't think I did anything remarkable. I think I did the minimum a decent person should do. He leaned forward slightly. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet but very clear. Emma, I've been writing for 30 years. I've walked into 100 places like that diner, and I can count on one hand the number of times someone looked at me the way you did. Not like a problem to manage, not like something to be afraid of or to tolerate, just like a person. She felt that land. I had people call me last night, she said, 11 of them. I am taking that seriously. I understand it's significant to a lot of people. I'm just telling you how it looks from where I'm standing because I think you deserve honesty. He studied her for a moment, then he said, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. She waited. I put out what happened, he said. I told people in my network. I told them the short version. A young woman working a diner customer comes in looking rough. She buys him breakfast with her own money. Her manager fires her for it. And Emma, I want you to understand something. That story, he stopped, chose his words carefully, which she was beginning to understand was characteristic of him. He was not a man who spoke carelessly. That story hit a nerve in a lot of people, in a lot of different places. I could tell, she said. 11 calls, that was unexpected. 11 calls was the first wave, he said. She stared at him. He held her look steady and serious. It's been 24 hours, Emma. The story has moved through 4 chapters, 2 states, and it's still going. I have brothers who have contacts. By the time I woke up this morning, I had 47 messages about you. The number hit her physically. She actually sat back. About me, she said flatly. About what you did. About what happened to you. Caleb, she pressed both hands flat on the table. I need you to help me understand what that means. Practically, because I have a brother with medical bills and a stack of rent I need to figure out, and 47 messages about my story I can't pay bills with that. She was surprised by her own directness, but he didn't flinch from it. No, he said, you can't, which is why I wanted to talk to you before anything else happened. He shifted in his chair, and she caught the small wince he suppressed, the same hitched movement she had noticed in the diner. Old injuries, she had thought then. She still thought so. I'm not here to make promises I can't back up. I'm here to tell you what's coming and to ask what you want. What do you mean what's coming? People want to do something, he said. When a story like this spreads the way this one is spreading, people don't just want to acknowledge it. They want to act. That's the nature of it. Act how, he looked at her carefully. There's talk of some of my brothers going to the diner. The floor dropped out of her stomach. To do what? To have breakfast, he said simply. She stared. That's it. That's it, he said. To have breakfast, to show up, to make a point, a quiet point, but a clear one, that what David Collins did was wrong, and that the values he thought he was protecting by firing you are not values anyone should be protecting. Emma was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the diner, about the couple at table 3, and Helen Park and Frank Delgado and his eggs. She thought about Pete in the kitchen who had asked no questions when she put in the order for Caleb's meal. She thought about Michael Bennett, the owner, who she had maybe spoken to 4 times in 3 years, and who mostly left the day-to-day to David. How many people, she asked. I don't know yet, he said honestly. It could be 20. It could be more. She thought about 20 motorcycles pulling up outside Riverside Corner. Dinerin felt something rise in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite exhilaration, but was something between the two. Something that recognized that a thing like that would not be quiet, would not be small, would be a statement that nobody could look away from. I have conditions, she said. He raised an eyebrow. If people are going to do something, if they're going to show up, I need it to be peaceful. Not because I think your people are dangerous, but because the moment anyone can frame it as threatening, the story changes. The story stops being about what I did and starts being about biker intimidation, and then everything gets distorted and nothing I care about is actually served. He nodded slowly. That's a fair condition. And I need nobody to threaten David Collins or speak to him aggressively, even if he deserves it. Also fair. And she stopped, looked at her coffee. I don't want to become a cause. Do you understand what I mean? I don't want to be turned into a symbol for something I didn't intend. I just helped a person. I want that to remain what it was. Caleb was quiet for a moment, a genuine quiet, not the prelude to an argument, but the quiet of a man actually listening. Emma, he said, can I tell you something about you that you might not see from where you're standing? She nodded. The fact that you just said all of that, he said, the fact that your first question was not, what can I get out of this? And your conditions are all about protecting other people rather than yourself. That is exactly why this story is spreading the way it is. People can tell the difference between someone performing kindness and someone who is actually kind. You were actually kind, and that's rarer than you think. She felt her throat do something. She kept her face steady because she was very practiced at keeping her face steady. I'm going to be honest with you, she said when she trusted her voice again. I'm scared. Not of you or your people. I'm scared because I'm 25 years old, and I just lost my job for doing something I knew was right. And I'm sitting here trying to hold it together, and you're telling me that my story has traveled through 2 states and 47 people care about it, and I don't know what to do with any of that. You don't have to do anything with it, Caleb said. I'm a practical person, she said. I don't know how to accept something I didn't earn. He looked at her steadily. You bought me breakfast with your last $15. That's different. It really isn't, he said. You gave something without thinking about whether you'd earned the right to give it. What's coming to you now, you earned it the same way, by not thinking about earning it. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, okay. Just that. Okay, one word, but it was a real word, not a performance of acquiescence. He seemed to understand the difference. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. I spoke to some people who know Michael Bennett, the owner of the diner. He paused. He doesn't know yet what David did, or he knows in broad strokes his manager fired a long-term employee, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't know the full picture. Emma felt something tighten in her. You told people about this. I told people facts, he said carefully, that a waitress was fired for refusing to turn away a customer who had done nothing wrong, that's all. But Michael Bennett has a reputation for caring about his business the right way. People who've dealt with him say he's a man who, when he understands what actually happened, will want to fix it. I'm not interested in being someone's redemption story, she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice and didn't apologize for it. I know, he said, but you might be interested in your job back. She looked out the window beside their table. She looked at the street, at the people walking past with their coffees and their earbuds and their ordinary Thursday mornings. She thought about his bills. She thought about Ryan. She thought about Pete in the kitchen and Helen Park and Frank's eggs and the way the diner smelled at 5:15 in the morning when she had it to herself for those 20 minutes before anyone arrived. She thought about David Collins telling her she was done there. She looked back at Caleb. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. He told her. They talked for 2 hours. She asked questions and he answered them. He proposed things and she pushed back on some of them and agreed to others. By the time they left the coffee shop, the sky had gone from gray to a thin winter blue, and Emma had a decision in her head that felt simultaneously terrifying and completely right, which in her experience was usually the sign that a decision was correct. She shook his hand at the door. He held it for a moment. You're tougher than you look, he said. I have to be, she said. Then because it was true and because he deserved to hear it. Thank you, Caleb, for not forgetting. He shook his head. I couldn't have forgotten if I tried. She took the bus home. She sat in the back and watched the city move past the windows and thought about chains. Not the kind of chains that bound people. The other kind. The kind her father used to talk about when he talked about actions and consequences, and the way a good deed didn't end with the deed itself but kept going, kept moving outward in directions you couldn't predict or plan. She had given a man water and a meal. He had given her $200. He had told people. People had called, and now something was gathering that she had set in motion with a glass of water and $15 and a conviction that her father had planted in her on a back porch when she was 9 years old. She got home and she sat across from Ryan and she told him everything. Not the abbreviated version, not the managed version she usually gave him to spare him worry. All of it. Caleb's words, his plans, her conditions, the 47 messages, the 2 hours in the coffee shop, the handshake at the door. Ryan listened without interrupting. He was good at that when it mattered. He had a stillness in him that made you feel genuinely heard rather than just tolerated until you finished talking. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad would have loved this." Emma looked at him. "He would have," Ryan said. "He always said that the right thing had a momentum of its own, that you didn't have to push it. You just had to start it." She hadn't said anything about her father in the whole telling of it, but Ryan had gotten there anyway. Because of course he had. Because they were their father's children, both of them, and they had the same compass, even if it sometimes pointed them in different directions. "I'm scared," she said, for the second time that day. She was getting better at saying it out loud. "I know," Ryan said, "but you're also ready." She slept well again that night. She woke up the next morning to 23 texts, not from numbers she recognized, from people she had never met in places she had never been. They were different from the calls she got in before, less formal, more personal. People telling her small pieces of their own stories. A woman named Terry, who had been fired from a grocery store for defending a homeless man who the manager wanted removed. A man named Paul, who had been the man nobody sat next to on the bus for 15 years, and the way that felt. A kid she was pretty sure from the syntax, maybe 19, who wrote most people would have just looked the other way. You didn't. That matters. She read every single one. She texted back every single one. Ryan found her at noon, still at the kitchen table, her coffee long, cold typing. He looked at the screen. He didn't say anything. He went and made her a fresh cup and set it beside her without breaking her concentration. And she looked up just long enough to meet his eyes, and then looked back down and kept typing. Because these were people, and people deserved to be responded to. That was the thing about Emma Whitmore that nobody had ever managed to take from her. Not the bills or the early mornings or the exhaustion or the loss or David Collins. She never stopped seeing people as people. Not the tired man who walked into her diner. Not the 11 callers in the dark. Not the 23 strangers who had reached out across the digital distance to tell her something about themselves. They were all people. They were all worth the full length of her attention. Her phone rang at 3 in the afternoon. Number she didn't recognize, different area code. Emma Whitmore, speaking. "My name is James Harrow. I'm a reporter for the Regional Dispatch." A pause. "I'm calling because a story has come across my desk that involves you, and I wanted to reach out directly before publishing anything." Emma put down her coffee cup very carefully. "What kind of story?" she said. "A human interest piece," he said, "about a waitress who was fired for helping a Hells Angels member. About the response from the biker community." Another pause, and she could hear him gauging her reaction through the silence. "It's a good story, Ms. Whitmore. The kind people need right now." She was quiet for 4 seconds. "Who gave you my name?" she said. "I'm afraid I can't disclose." "I'm not asking you to disclose a source," she said. "I'm asking you a general question about how this reached you, because I need to understand how wide this has spread before I say another word." He seemed genuinely surprised by that. A different kind of surprise than the managed expectation kind, a real kind. "It came through social media," he said. "Multiple posts on different platforms. Your name was already public." Her name was already public. She let that land, let it fully arrive. She had given a man breakfast 3 days ago. Her name was already public. The story had crossed 2 states and 4 chapters and 47 messages and 23 texts, and now it had reached a newspaper reporter. "I need 24 hours, she said. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm not refusing," she said. "I'm asking for 24 hours to speak to someone before I talk to you. Will you give me that He hesitated. She could hear him calculating. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning," he said. 8 a.m. "Thank you," she said and meant it and ended the call. She sat there for a moment, then she picked her phone back up and called Caleb Walker. He answered on the second ring. "A reporter called me," she said, a pause. "How'd they get to you this fast?" "Apparently it's on social media, multiple platforms. My name is already public." She kept her voice level. "Caleb, I need to know how wide this is before tomorrow morning." "Let me make some calls," he said. "I'll know in an hour." "Okay." "Emma." "Yeah." "Are you all right?" She thought about it. The real question under the question was whether she was overwhelmed, whether she was retreating, whether the scope of it was making her want to take it all back and disappear into anonymity. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm just recalibrating." "That's a very organized way to describe a significant moment," he said, and there was something in his voice that was as close to warmth as she'd heard from him. "I'm a very organized person," she said. He called back in 50 minutes, not an hour. 50 minutes, which she suspected was because he'd made multiple calls simultaneously. "All right," he said. "Here's what I know. There are posts on 4 different platforms. The story is being shared not by me or my people directly. It's spread on its own from that point. We're looking at roughly 800 shares across platforms as of this afternoon, trending upward." Emma pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. 800. 3 days ago, she had given a man water and eggs. "The reporter," Caleb said. "Do you want my read on it?" "Yes," she said. "Talk to him," he said, "on your terms. You set the boundaries. You decide what gets said and what doesn't. You control the narrative or the narrative controls you. That's the only option at this point." "That's what I was thinking," she said. "You're good at this," he said. "At what?" "Thinking clearly when things are moving fast." She almost laughed. "I don't feel like I'm thinking clearly." "No," he said. "That's how you know you are." After she hung up, she sat at the table and she did not make a list. For once, she just sat and let the size of it surround her without trying to organize it into manageable pieces. She let herself feel the full scope of it. The reporter, the 800 shares, the 47 messages, the 11 calls, the $200, the glass of water, her father on the back porch. The chain that had started with one small thing and was now reaching further than she could see. Ryan appeared in the doorway. He looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. "There's a reporter," she said, "and apparently it's on social media. 800 shares, and that was as of this afternoon." Ryan sat down slowly. "Emma, I know. I know." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" She looked at her brother. His dark eyes, their mother's eyes, steady on her face. She thought about everything she'd been carrying since the morning she found him barely functional and realized she would be the one holding everything together. She thought about the medical bills and the early alarms and the aprons she had folded and set on the counter and the job she had walked away from rather than betray something her father had taught her. She thought about Caleb Walker saying people who give kindness must also learn how to receive it. She thought about a man who had walked into a diner expecting the world to close against him and finding instead a young woman with a glass of water and $15 in the absolute unshakable belief that he deserved both. "I'm going to talk to the reporter," she said, "on my terms." Yeah, she met Ryan's eyes. "Because the story isn't about me. It's about what happened to Caleb in that diner. What happens to people like him every day in every public place they walk into. That's the story that's worth telling." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Pride she recognized, though he would never name it that. He just nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She picked up her phone and put the reporter's number in her contacts. And she wrote at the top of her list above, "Remember that people surprised you today. One more line, tell the true story." She started 3 times. Outside, the city was getting on with its evening. Somewhere across it, she knew Caleb Walker was on his phone. Other people were sharing posts. A reporter was looking at his notes. A diner manager named David Collins was probably going home without any idea of what was coming. And somewhere deeper still in the network of people who had heard about a young blonde waitress and a glass of water and a meal that cost $15, something was still moving, still building, still traveling in directions she couldn't see yet. She had started a chain. She didn't know where it ended. She wasn't sure anymore that it ended at all. James Harrow called at exactly 8 o'clock the next morning. Not 8:01, not 7:59. 8 o'clock on the dot, which told Emma something about him before he said a single word, that he was a man who kept his word on small things, which usually meant he kept it on larger ones too. She had been awake since 5:30, not because of the old alarm habit, though that was part of it, because she hadn't been able to stop thinking, and at a certain point lying in the dark thinking felt less productive than sitting at the kitchen table thinking. So she had gotten up and made coffee and sat with her notepad and written down in careful columns what she was willing to say and what she wasn't. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Whitmore," Harrow said, "thank you for giving me until this morning." "Thank you for waiting," she said. "Before we start, I want to be clear about something." "Of course. I'll talk to you. I will answer your questions honestly, but I have two conditions." She looked at her notepad. "First, the story is not about me. The story is about what happens to people who get judged before they've done anything wrong." Caleb Walker walked into a diner looking for somewhere to rest and eat, and the assumption was immediate. "That's the story. I'm context." A pause. She could hear him writing. "And the second condition, nothing about my brother," she said. "His situation is private. It's not part of this." Another pause. Longer. "I can agree to both of those," he said finally. "Within reason." "Within reason meaning what?" "Meaning I'll honor your framing if the facts support it. I won't manufacture a story, Ms. Whitmore, but I also won't suppress relevant context if it becomes part of the public record independently." She respected that answer. She didn't like it entirely, but she respected it because it was honest rather than reassuring, and she valued honest over reassuring. "All right," she said, "ask your questions." They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. He was a good interviewer, not in the aggressive trap-setting way that she had vaguely feared, but in the way of someone who asked a clean question and then actually listened to the answer instead of just waiting to ask the next one. He asked her to walk him through that morning from her perspective. He asked what she had seen in Caleb Walker that other people hadn't. He asked what went through her mind when David Collins told her to remove him. He asked what she felt when she folded her apron. She answered every question with the same directness she had used with Caleb in the coffee shop. She didn't perform emotion. She didn't try to make herself sound noble. She just described what happened and what she had thought and felt while it was happening, and she trusted that the truth of it was sufficient without embellishment. When he asked about the calls she'd received, the 47 messages, the 800 shares, she answered those too. When he asked what she thought it meant that the story had traveled that far that fast, she said what she had told Ryan. "It means people are hungry for evidence that the world isn't entirely closed," she said. "People who've been on the wrong side of a snap judgment, and there are more of them than anyone counts. They're looking for proof that sometimes someone does the different thing. I happened to do the different thing, and it happened to reach them. That's all." "That's a very modest assessment of your own action," Harrow said. "It's an accurate one," she said. After she hung up, she sat for a moment. Then she called Caleb. "I talked to the reporter," she said. "How'd it go?" "It went well, I think. He's honest. I got my conditions in." "Good." A pause. "Emma, something's developed that I need to tell you about." She tightened her grip on the phone slightly. With Caleb, she had learned in 4 days when he prefaced something with, "I need to tell you," he meant it was significant. He didn't use that framing casually. "Tell me," she said. "The chapter voted last night," he said. "Not just mine, 3 chapters. There's going to be a ride." She had known this was coming. Caleb had described something like it in the coffee shop. But hearing it stated as a decision already made, as a thing that was now certain rather than theoretical, made it real in a way the theoretical version hadn't been. "When," she said. "Day after tomorrow," he said. "Saturday morning." "How many people?" He was quiet for just a moment. "Best estimate right now is somewhere between 150 and 200. The number went through her like cold water. 150 to 200 people. Riding to the diner. For her. Because of a glass of water and a meal that had cost her $15 and a job. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. That's a lot of people." "I know. David Collins is going to—" "David Collins is not the target of this," Caleb said, and his voice had something in it that was firm without being aggressive, a clarifying firmness. "This is not about David Collins. This is about showing up for someone who showed up for one of ours. That's all this is. But he's going to be there when it happens." Possibly, I can't control that. She stood up from the kitchen table and moved to the window. She didn't look out of it. She stood with her back to the light facing the interior of her apartment, and she thought, "My condition still stands," she said. "Everything we talked about in the coffee shop." "Agreed. I personally will brief everyone before they ride. Peaceful, respectful, no aggression towards staff or management." He paused. "Emma, I want you to be there." She had not expected that. "You want me there?" "Oh, not at the front, not on display. I'm not asking you to be a spectacle, but I want you to see it. I think you need to see it." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because you've been carrying things alone for a long time," he said. "And I think seeing this, seeing what one decent act from one person actually generates, I think it would do something for you that I can't do for you in a coffee shop conversation." She thought about what Ryan had said. "You're also ready." "I'll be there," she said. She told Ryan that evening. She sat across from him and laid it out flat, the numbers to the timeline, Saturday morning, her decision to attend. Ryan stared at her. 150 to 200 Hells Angels members riding to the diner where you got fired. Roughly, yes. Because you bought one of them breakfast. Because I treated one of them like a person, she said. The breakfast was incidental. Ryan was silent for a long stretch. Then he said, "I want to come." "Ryan, Emma." His voice had the particular steadiness that appeared when he had made a decision he wasn't going to be argued out of. It was one of the ways he was most like their father. "You've been protecting me from things for 4 years. I'm 22. I'm your brother. I want to be there when this happens." She looked at him. She thought about all the mornings she had checked his medication before leaving for a job she no longer had. She thought about the way she calibrated her voice and her face to give him the version of reality that wouldn't add to his burden. She thought about Ryan saying, "I know he would have about their father," without her having to explain. "Okay," she said. His face changed. Yeah, she said. "But you tell me the moment you need to leave, promise me." "I promise," she nodded. And then, because it was true, and because she had been getting better at saying true things, "I'm glad you'll be there." He reached across the table, same gesture as before, hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held his properly. Saturday morning arrived the way significant mornings always did, without ceremony, without announcement, with the same gray light and the same alarm and the same sequence of getting up and making coffee and breathing through the weight of what was waiting on the other side of the next few hours. She and Ryan took the bus. She had thought about this, about whether arriving in any other way made a statement she wasn't trying to make. She decided the bus was right. She had always taken the bus. She would take the bus now. She wore the same clothes she'd wear to any other morning. Not her diner uniform, she didn't have a reason to wear that, but the same kind of clothes. Practical, clean, nothing performed. Ryan wore his good jacket, the dark blue one their mother had bought him 2 Christmases before she passed. Emma noticed but didn't say anything about it. Some choices didn't need commentary. They got off the bus 4 blocks from the diner. Emma had told Caleb she didn't want to arrive in the middle of anything, didn't want her arrival to be a moment. She wanted to watch it happen. He had understood and had told her he would have someone look out for her so she would know where to stand. That someone turned out to be Dennis, the man who had called her that first night. She recognized his voice before she recognized his face, a large man with a kind expression that sat somewhat incongruously on a frame built for physical force. He found her on the corner with a naturalness that suggested he was good at finding people without making it feel like surveillance. "Emma," he said. "Dennis," she said. "This is my brother Ryan." Dennis extended his hand and Ryan shook it with the composure that had always impressed Emma about him, the ability to meet any situation at face value without performing either awe or distance. "We've got a good spot," Dennis said. "You'll be able to see everything, but you won't be in the middle of it. Come on." They followed him. Emma heard it before she saw it. That was the thing she would remember afterward above everything else. The sound of it arriving before the sight of it. A low rumble, distant at first, the kind of sound you feel in your chest before your ears fully register. It is separate from the ambient noise of the city. Like weather, like something geological and inevitable moving in your direction. She heard it and she stopped walking. Dennis stopped beside her. Ryan stopped on her other side. The sound grew. It grew the way a river grows when you're walking toward it gradually, and then suddenly the volume increasing in stages until it was no longer background but foreground, no longer something you were approaching, but something that was approaching you. And then she saw them. They came around the corner of Market Street in formation, not a ragged or incidental grouping, but an actual formation organized with the kind of precision that spoke to coordination and intention. Pairs of riders, then more pairs, then more stretching back along the street further than she could see from where she was standing. The engines filled the air completely. The sound wasn't threatening. She had braced for it to feel threatening, had been ready to process it as something alarming, but it wasn't. It was something else. It was the sound of scale, of numbers, of many people moving as one deliberate thing. Leather vests, road-worn faces, the Hells Angels patches visible on each of them, some identical to Caleb's, some with different chapter markers in different locations. Men and women both she registered with something like surprise. She hadn't expected women, and she felt the smallness of that assumption immediately and set it down. They kept coming. Ryan made a sound beside her, not a word, just a sound, the kind that escapes without permission when you witness something that exceeds your framework. "How many?" Emma said quietly. To Dennis, not taking her eyes off the road. "Final count before we rolled out was 214, Dennis said. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it. Something that was its own kind of a move, the kind of move that comes from being part of something larger than yourself and knowing it. 214. She had started a chain with a glass of water, and it had brought 214 people to a diner on a Saturday morning. She couldn't speak for a moment. She didn't try to. The lead riders pulled up in front of Riverside Corner Diner and stopped. The engines cut one by one, the sound dying in waves, and the silence that replaced it felt enormous and waited like the silence after something significant has been said. And then she saw Caleb. He was at the front. He dismounted and stood on the sidewalk in front of the diner and looked at it for a moment the way she had looked at the kitchen table the night she'd made her lists, like a person taking stock of what they were about to do. He turned and said something to the men behind him. She couldn't hear it from where she was standing, but the response was immediate. Riders began dismounting, locking their bikes, straightening their jackets with the same unconscious, tidying gesture that she recognized from any person about to enter a place they wanted to be received well in. They walked into the diner. Not all at once, not in a rush. Caleb and 4 others first, then more behind them in steady groups, because the diner had 10 tables and 8 counter stools, and 214 people couldn't sit inside at the same time, and they all seemed to know this without being told. Those who couldn't fit inside stood outside, stood not loitered, stood with the particular patience of people who understood they were making a point, and that the point required them to conduct themselves accordingly. Emma watched all of it. She watched it, and she felt something happen in her chest that she didn't have a word for. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness, though. Happiness was somewhere in it. It was something more compound than any single word could contain. It was the feeling of a thing you did alone, a small, private thing, suddenly becoming visible in the full size of what it had always been, the size you couldn't see from inside the moment of doing it. She had helped one man, and here was the full length of that action standing on a sidewalk in the morning cold, 214 people deep. Ryan put his hand on her shoulder. She reached up and held it there. Inside the diner through the window, she could now see from her position the tables were filling. She could see Pete at the kitchen window, Pete who never asked questions, Pete who had put in Caleb's order without a word. And from even this distance, she could see that Pete was moving fast, moving with the kind of energized efficiency that came from being genuinely busy. And she knew that meant orders were coming in, real orders, people sitting down and ordering food and paying for it. She could see the counter full, every stool taken. She could see Caleb at a table with 3 other men, heads bent slightly toward each other, the body language of people having an actual conversation rather than performing one. And then she saw David Collins come out of the back. She watched it happen from outside the window, and she couldn't hear any of it, could only read the body language of it, but that was enough. David Collins came out of the back with the expression of a man who had been told something alarming and needed to assess the situation himself before deciding how to respond. He stood at the edge of the dining area and looked at the full tables at the counter, at the people outside on the sidewalk, and she watched the sequence of emotions move through him. Alarm assessment, something that might have been the beginning of comprehension. He made his way across the dining room, toward Caleb's table. Emma's hand tightened on Ryan's. She couldn't hear it. She could only see it. David saying something. Caleb looking up at him, completely unruffled the way a man looks when he knows exactly where he stands. Caleb responding. David's face shifting through something complicated. One of the other men at the table said something. David said something back. And then David Collins did something Emma did not expect. He sat down. Not at Caleb's table, at the adjacent empty one, pulling out a chair. With slightly shaking hands, lowering himself into it like a man whose legs had made a decision. His brain was still catching up to. He sat down, and the man across from him, at Caleb's table, she would learn later, his name was Marcus. One of the chapter's longest-serving members leaned slightly toward him and said something, and David Collins sat there and listened. Ryan said very quietly next to her, "What's happening?" "I think someone's being honest with him," Emma said, for possibly the first time. She didn't know if that was true. She didn't know what was being said. But the posture of it, David Collins sitting there, not defending, not managing, not performing, suggested that something was landing that had not previously landed for him. She found out later. She found out that Marcus had said to him very plainly and without anger, "Do you understand that the woman you fired has never had a single customer complaint in 3 years? Do you understand that she covered shifts for coworkers out of her own time and asked for nothing in return? Do you understand that the only thing she ever did that you didn't like was treat a human being like a human being?" And David Collins had not answered. Not because he was defensive, but because he was for possibly the first time actually thinking about the questions instead of preparing a response to them. She found out that Caleb had said nothing during this exchange. He had let Marcus talk. And when Marcus finished, Caleb had looked at David and said quietly, "She didn't do anything to you. She just wouldn't do something wrong." She found out that David Collins had sat there for a long time, but that was later. Right now, she was standing on the sidewalk with Ryan's hand on her shoulder, watching through a window, and then Dennis said quietly beside her, "Caleb wants to know if you'll come in." She felt her breath catch. "Tell him I'm good out here," she said. "I don't need to be part of the inside of it." "He said you'd say that," Dennis said. "He also said to tell you you started this. You should see where it landed." She looked at Ryan. Ryan looked back at her. "Your call," he said, but his eyes said what his words didn't, which was go. She went. She walked in through the front door of Riverside Corner Diner, and the smell hit her immediately. Coffee and bacon and something warm and reliable. The smell she had woken up to for 3 years. The smell that was simply part of the fabric of her daily existence. And it hit her with a force she hadn't prepared for. Nobody looked at her. Nobody announced her. She walked in and found a space near the counter and stood there and looked at the room. Full tables, full stools. The particular texture of a diner that is operating at an absolute capacity, but not chaos, the good version of busy, the version where everything is working, where the food is moving and the coffee is pouring, and the human sound of conversation fills every corner. Pete saw her through the kitchen window. He pointed at her. She pointed back. It wasn't a word, but it was a whole conversation. She found Caleb's eyes across the room. He gave her one small nod, the same nod he had given her in the coffee shop when they had reached an understanding. She gave it back. And then the door to the back office opened and Michael Bennett walked out. Emma had spoken to Michael Bennett perhaps 4 times in 3 years. He was the kind of owner who trusted his managers to run the day-to-day and appeared for the big things, inspections, staff events, genuine crises. He was 60-something, with the face of a man who had worked hard his whole life and was not embarrassed by it. He came through the office door and stopped when he saw the room. He saw the room the way Emma had seen Caleb Walker in the doorway, not the surface of it, but the meaning underneath it. He stood there for a moment, just a moment. Then he looked for the counter and found a space beside it and stood there the way Emma was standing, just looking, taking it in. He found her in the room the way she found Caleb across the space through the movement and conversation and the particular human density of 200 people's presence in and around a 10-table diner. He looked at Emma. She looked at him. He made his way across the room. She held her ground. She wasn't going to move toward him. Not because she was performing anything, just because moving toward him would change what this was, would make it supplication instead of meeting, and she had done nothing to supplicate for. He reached her. He was about her height, maybe an inch taller, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has recently learned something that has revised his understanding of a situation he thought he had understood. Emma Whitmore, he said. Michael, she said. He looked around the diner once more at all of it, and then back at her. I've been reading about you. I know, she said. I had a conversation with Caleb Walker this morning, he said, before the ride. He called me yesterday and we spoke for about an hour, and then I pulled your employee file. He paused. 3 years, Emma. 3 years and I couldn't find a single complaint. Not a customer complaint, not a coworker complaint, not one. She said nothing. I found 8 notes in your file, he said, all of them commendations. One from a regular customer who wrote in to say you'd remembered her coffee order for 18 months. One from Pete saying you stayed 2 hours after your shift to help him through a kitchen crisis without being asked. 6 others. He stopped, looked at her steadily. David had written up a verbal warning last month. I obeyed him that too. It said you were insufficiently deferential to management guidance. Those were his words. She felt something move in her. Not anger exactly, closer to recognition. The recognition of a thing you have known in your body for a long time finally being named out loud by someone else. I know what that means, she said. It means I didn't agree with him. Yes, Michael said, it does. Another pause. I want to offer you your job back. She had known this was coming. Caleb had told her it was possible. She had thought about what she would say when it arrived. But hearing it here in the diner she had worked in for 3 years, surrounded by 200 people who had ridden from wherever they had come from to make a point that had somehow become this moment. Hearing it now, it landed differently than she had rehearsed it. Tell me about the conditions, she said. Because she had told Caleb in the coffee shop she didn't want temporary promises. Michael looked at her. Something in his expression shifted a slight recalibration, the look of a man who had expected negotiation and was meeting something more fundamental instead. What conditions do you need, he said. She looked at him directly. I need to know what happens to David. A pause. He's been suspended, pending review. That's not an answer about what happens to him. Michael held her gaze. He'll likely be moved to a role without direct employee management. That's an answer, she said. It's not the one I'd have written, but I understand why you'd make it. She paused. I have more. Tell me. I want the ability to make judgment calls about customers without being second-guessed by management when those calls are in line with basic human decency. That should have always been the case, he said. It should have, she agreed, but it wasn't, and I need it stated clearly so it doesn't require another incident to enforce. He nodded. Done. She looked at him. She thought about the question she had asked Caleb in the coffee shop, the question she had decided she would ask Michael if this moment came. What happens, she said slowly, when everyone forgets this story, when the cameras leave and there are cameras now? I saw them outside and the motorcycles are gone and it's just Tuesday morning in an empty diner. What happens to the principals then? Michael Bennett was quiet for a long moment. A real quiet, not a stalling quiet, a thinking quiet. I don't know how to give you a promise that guarantees against human forgetfulness, he said finally. I don't think anyone can give you that. What I can tell you is that I've been in this business for 22 years, and in 22 years, I've learned one thing that I apparently forgot to enforce well enough in this building, which is that how you treat people is the only metric that doesn't lie. Revenue lies. Reviews lie. How you treat people, that's the real number. He paused. I forgot to make that the standard. I'm trying to make it the standard now. Emma looked at him for a long moment. It wasn't a perfect answer. She didn't trust perfect answers. This was an honest one with its uncertainty built in and that she could work with. I want a 30-day trial, she said, not because I'm uncertain, but because I think it's the right structure for both of us. Agreed, he said immediately. And I want to talk about the role, she said. David told me I was let go from my waitress position. If I'm coming back, I want to talk about what I'm coming back to. He met her eyes. I was thinking assistant manager. She felt it, the size of it, the difference between that and the apron she had folded and set on the counter 4 days ago. She kept her face steady. Let's talk about what that means, she said. They talked for 20 minutes, standing near the counter of a full diner, the conversation happening around them and through them, the sound of 200 people, and Pete's kitchen and coffee machines making a kind of backdrop that felt unexpectedly like the right setting for a negotiation about something real. When they finished, Emma shook his hand. Michael Bennett shook it back. He looked relieved. Not in a weak way, in the way of a man who had recognized he had something to fix and was now in the process of fixing it, and the relief was the relief of someone who still believes repair is possible. She made her way back through the diner, back toward the door. Caleb was there. "Well," he said. "Assistant manager," she said. 30-day trial, conditions accepted." He studied her face. "You look like a person who just made a decision she's comfortable with." "I look like a person who is trying to process 200 motorcycles in a job offer in the same morning," she said. Something moved across his face. She was getting better at reading him, and what moved there was something she recognized, the thing that people who have been through hard things look like when they see someone else come out on the right side of one. "You okay?" he said. She thought about it honestly. She thought about Ryan outside with Dennis, probably talking in the way that men sometimes talked to each other around things rather than directly at them, which was its own kind of conversation. She thought about Michael Bennett and his 22 years and his honest answer. She thought about Pete's face through the kitchen window, the pointing. She thought about Caleb handing her $200 and watching her walk out. She thought about her father and the fireflies and the lessons she had carried into every shift. "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay." He nodded. "Good." She reached the door, stepped out into the morning air. Ryan was there and Dennis was there, and outside the diner, the people who couldn't fit inside were still standing, still waiting, still being exactly what they had come to be. A presence, a statement, a visible proof of something that most people had given up, expecting the world to provide. Ryan looked at her face. "Assistant manager," she said. He made a sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind that comes from somewhere real. "Dad would have been," he started. "I know," she said. They stood there in the cold air and the sound of the diner behind them. Full, warm, alive, with the business of 200 people having breakfast on a Saturday morning, felt like something she wanted to hold on to file away in the part of herself that she pulled from when things got hard again. Because things would get hard again, they always did. But right now, standing in the cold with her brother beside her and 200 people behind her and a job she had earned twice, Emma Whitmore felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt the weight on her shoulders, and she felt for the first time that she was not carrying it alone. The article ran on Monday morning. Emma knew it was coming. James Harrow had told her it would publish early in the week, but knowing something is coming and having it arrive are still two entirely different experiences. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee when Ryan came out of his room, already holding his phone, turning it toward her without saying a word, and she read the headline before she had taken her second sip of the morning. "Waitress fired for helping Hell's Angels member gets last laugh and a new job." She made a small, involuntary sound. "That headline," she said. "I know," Ryan said. "It makes it sound like revenge." "I know," he said again, "but read the actual piece." She read it. Harrow had been as good as his word. The story was framed the way she had asked about judgment and assumption and the cost of treating people as categories instead of individuals. Her name was in it, but she was context, not the centerpiece. Caleb was in it, described with precision and without sensationalism. The ride was in it. Michael Bennett's offer was in it, stated plainly without editorial flourish. Her conditions were in it, which she hadn't quite expected, and which read she could see this reading it from the outside as the actions of a person who was not interested in being a symbol and was very interested in lasting change. Harrow had written one line near the end that stopped her completely. She read it 3 times. What Emma Whitmore did was not complicated. She gave a tired man water and a meal and the basic dignity of being seen. What followed the calls, the ride, the 214 people on a Saturday morning, suggests that basic dignity has become rare enough to be remarkable. That is not a statement about Emma Whitmore. It is a statement about the rest of us. She put the phone down. Ryan was watching her. "He got it right," she said quietly. "He did," Ryan said. She picked up her coffee and held it with both hands and sat there for a moment, in the particular quiet of a thing having been said correctly, the satisfaction of it that was also underneath a kind of grief. Because if it was remarkable, it was only remarkable because it was rare. And rare meant that most of the time, the tired man at the corner table didn't get water, didn't get a meal, got asked to leave. Her phone started going. It had been active since Saturday. She had managed it in the way she managed most things systematically, in batches with boundaries she had set and intended to maintain. But Monday morning, with the article live, was different from the days before. The numbers were different. The comments on the shared links were different. The texts from numbers she didn't recognize were arriving in a rhythm that made her phone feel like it was vibrating continuously, a low hum beneath everything. She turned it face down on the table. "I have to go back to work tomorrow," she said to Ryan. He looked up from his own phone. "How do you feel about that?" She thought about it honestly. "Like, I need to do the work and not the story," she said. "The story is out there now, and it's going to do what it does. But I have a job to do, and if I spend the next 30 days being the woman from the article instead of the assistant manager who earned her place, then the 30-day trial means nothing." Ryan looked at her steadily. "You know what the difference is between you and most people?" She raised an eyebrow. "Most people after something like Saturday would spend at least a week feeling amazing about themselves. You've already moved past it to the next thing." "I'm not past it," she said. "I'm just next to it, carrying it with me instead of standing in it." He considered this. "That's a very dad thing to say." She smiled, actually smiled, the full one that she didn't always have available. "Yeah, I know." She arrived at the diner at 7 Tuesday morning. Not 5:15, she no longer had a coffee station to open, which still felt strange, but 7 for a meeting with Michael Bennett that he had requested before the floor opened. She had her notepad. She had a list of questions. She had underneath both of those things the particular combination of readiness and nerves that accompanied any genuine beginning. Michael was already there. So was someone she didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s, brisk and organized, who turned out to be Sandra Chen, the HR coordinator for the 3 restaurants Michael owned. Sandra had a folder. The folder had papers in it. Emma sat down across from both of them and felt the reality of the thing she had agreed to settle fully into her body. This was real. This was happening. Michael started by asking her a question she hadn't expected. "Tell me what you think was wrong with this place," he said. "Not what David did specifically. The culture underneath it. Tell me what you saw in 3 years that I didn't." She looked at him. She looked at Sandra, who had her pen ready. She decided to answer honestly and deal with whatever that produced. "The staff didn't trust each other," she said. "Not because they were bad people. Pete is one of the most reliable people I've ever worked with, and most of the servers were good at what they did. But there was no structure for actually talking to each other about problems. Everyone managed their own section and their own issues, and if something went wrong, it went sideways quietly instead of getting addressed. And that meant small things became big things because nobody caught them early." Michael nodded slowly. "Go on." "Customers were managed as revenue units," she said. "That sounds harsh, but it's accurate. The training, what little of it there was about efficiency and upselling. Nothing about the fact that a lot of the people who come into a place like this are having the best or worst part of their day here, and how you treat them while they're here actually matters to them as people." She paused. "That's not a philosophical statement. It's practical. People who feel seen come back. People who feel processed don't. And the thing with David," Michael said, "a specific thing, not just the Saturday incident. What was the pattern?" She thought about the write-up. Insufficiently deferential to management guidance. She thought about the dozen small moments over 3 years when she had made a judgment call about a customer or a coworker situation, and David had questioned it not because she was wrong, but because she hadn't cleared it with him first. "He managed from ego instead of outcome," she said. "He needed to be the one making decisions more than he needed the decisions to be right. And that meant that people working for him learned to wait for permission instead of using their own judgment, which means the place was only ever as good as David's judgment and not as good as it could have been if the people who were actually in the room were empowered to respond to what was actually happening." Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What would you do differently?" She opened her notepad. She had thought about this, not just since Saturday. She had been thinking about it, she realized, for 3 years, the quiet part of her brain that watched the diner operate and registered what worked and what didn't, the part that she had never had authority to act on. She told him. She talked for 20 minutes clearly, practically, without overselling any of it. She talked about communication structures between staff. She talked about a simple system for flagging problems early instead of absorbing them silently. She talked about the approach she took with the customers, the paying attention, the learning names and orders and moods, and how that could be taught not as a performance, but as a genuine practice of treating people like people. She talked about what Pete had been doing in that kitchen for years without being acknowledged, and how acknowledgement was not expensive, but its absence was. Michael Bennett sat across from her and listened the way Harrow had listened, actually completely, without the gap of waiting to respond. When she finished, he looked at Sandra, and Sandra looked at her notes and looked back at Emma. 30 days, Michael said, starting today. Starting today, Emma agreed. She walked out of the office and onto the floor and stood there for a moment. The diner was beginning to fill with the early morning rush. The coffee was already running. She could smell it, that reliable smell. The smell that meant the day had started and things were in motion. Pete's voice came through from the kitchen, calling a ticket. Helen Park was at her usual stool at the counter decaf she believed was regular, talking to the woman next to her. Frank Delgado was at table 2, poking at what appeared to be slightly wet eggs. Emma walked to the counter and asked the server on the floor, a young woman named Angela she knew from 3 years of parallel shifts. Frank's eggs. Angela looked at the ticket. He ordered scrambled. Get Pete to redo them, dry. Don't mention it to Frank, just swap the plate. Angela looked at her. He didn't say anything. He never does, Emma said. Angela picked up the plate and went to the window without further questions. Emma stood at the counter and felt herself settle into the space the way you settle into something that fits you. Not without effort, not without the learning curve of a new role and new authority, and the particular challenge of being the person who makes decisions in a place where she used to take orders. But with the deep familiarity of a place, she knew people, she knew a rhythm. She had been living inside for 3 years. She had a job to do. She did it. The first week was hard in the way that first weeks of real responsibility were always hard, not catastrophically, but with a steady weight of decisions that used to belong to someone else and now belonged to her. She had to learn how to inhabit authority without performing it, how to make a call and commit to it without the second guessing that had been the background noise of every shift under David's management. The staff were watchful. She understood that. She would have been watchful too. She gave them reasons not to be by being consistent, by explaining her reasoning when she made decisions that affected them, by asking before assuming, by doing what she had always done, which was pay attention. Pete was the first one to give her an honest read. It was the end of her 5th shift, a Thursday, and she was closing out the day with the kitchen staff, and Pete was wiping down the grill with the particular focused thoroughness of a man who took cleanliness seriously, and she asked him directly. How are we doing? She said. Honest. He didn't look up from the grill. Different, he said. Different good or different wait and see. He thought about it. Different like the air pressure changed, he said. Like a storm went through and left things cleaner than they were. But you're still checking the ceiling for damage. She considered this. Fair, she said. Tell me when you find damage. He looked up from the grill. You know what you are that David wasn't. Tell me. You actually want to know, he said. David asked how things were going, so you'd say fine. You're asking because you want to know. She held his look. I want to know. Then we're okay, he said, and went back to the grill. That was the 5th day. On the 8th day, David Collins came back. Not to work, he was still suspended, his future with the restaurant still formally undecided. He came in as a customer in the mid-morning lull when the breakfast rush had subsided and the lunch crowd hadn't arrived. Emma saw him come in the door and felt the particular shift in her chest that the sight of him produced not fear, not even anger, Ezekiel, but a kind of readiness. The way your body prepares itself for something it knows requires care. She let Angela seat him. She stayed at the counter. She watched. He sat at a table by the window, not the corner table she noticed, and ordered coffee and sat there with his hands around the mug, looking like a man who had recently had several significant things happen to him in close succession and was still processing the order of them. After 10 minutes, Emma walked to his table. She didn't approach as a server. She had an apron on, but she was not there to take his order. She stood at the edge of his table and he looked up at her, and for a moment they both just acknowledged the particular strangeness of the situation. David, she said. Emma, he said. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She did this without asking because she had decided on the way over that asking would make it into something it didn't need to be. She just sat down and put her hands on the table and looked at him. He looked like he had slept badly for several days, which was information she filed without using against him. You didn't have to come in, she said. I know, he said. So why did you? He looked at his coffee mug, then at the table, then at her, and when he finally made eye contact, it was the look of a man who has been through something that has revised his understanding of himself and is not entirely comfortable with the revision. Because I've been in this building for 11 years, he said, because I needed to see it, what it looks like now. He looked around the diner briefly. It's the same place. It's the same place, Emma agreed, but it feels different. Things feel different when you pay attention to people, she said and kept her voice level, not pointed. A statement, not a weapon. He was quiet for a moment, a long one. She let it sit. I was wrong, he said, finally, plainly, without the elaborate scaffolding of justification that wrong people often constructed around an admission to make it bearable. Just I was wrong. She had not expected the plainness of it. She had prepared herself for several versions of this conversation, had rehearsed responses to deflection, impartial admission, and the kind of apology that was really a request for absolution. She had not prepared herself for something this unornamented. I know you were, she said. I told myself I was protecting the business. He turned his coffee mug a quarter turn, a small nervous gesture. That was true, and it was also not the real thing. The real thing was that he scared me, the patches and the size of him and the way the room went quiet when he walked in. I reacted to my own fear and I dressed it up as management. He stopped. I should have been better than that. She sat with that for a moment. You should have, she said, not cruelly, just accurately. He nodded. David, she leaned forward slightly. What you did cost me a week of sleep and a week of my brother worrying and a very real period of not knowing how I was going to pay the next set of bills. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it didn't matter. He held her look. He didn't flinch from it, which she gave him credit for. But I also know, she said, that people can look at something they did and actually see it. Not just feel bad about getting caught. Actually see it. She paused. The question is what you do with that. He was quiet for a moment. What would you want me to do with it? She thought about it honestly. What did she want? Not for herself, she had what she needed or the beginning of it, but in the larger sense. What did she want this moment to become? I want you to carry it, she said, not as punishment, as information. The next time your fear about how something looks overrides your read of how a person actually is. I want you to remember this, that's all. He looked at her for a long time. Something moved through his expression, not the full resolution of anything, because that kind of thing didn't happen in a single conversation at a diner table. But something. Okay, he said, the same word she had said to Caleb, the same weight behind it. She stood up. She was not going to extend the conversation beyond its natural length. It had said what it needed to say. Come back whenever you want, she said. It's a good diner. And she meant it. She walked away and didn't look back and felt the particular exhaustion of having done something difficult with care, the good kind of tired, the kind that meant you had given the full weight of your attention to something that deserved it. The following Tuesday, Ryan called her while she was doing inventory counts in the back. She stepped out of the storeroom and answered. You need to come home, he said. His voice had something in it she couldn't fully read. Her first instinct was medical. It was always medical, that first instinct, and 3 years of it had not made it less immediate. Ryan, are you? I'm fine, he said quickly. I'm okay, but you need to come home. There's something here. What kind of something? The kind you need to see in person, he said. She told Angela she was taking a half hour and she took the bus home faster than she usually took the bus for anything. And when she walked in the door, Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table with an envelope in front of him and an expression she had not seen on his face in a long time. It came this morning, he said, hand-delivered. Dennis dropped it off. She looked at the envelope. Her name was on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. She sat down and picked it up. Inside was a folded letter in a separate sealed document. She read the letter first. It was from a Hells Angels community assistance program that she had not known existed. The letter was formal, but not cold, written in the direct language of people who didn't have patience for excessive ceremony. It explained that the program provided support to families facing sustained medical costs, that it had been operating for 11 years, that it was funded entirely by chapter contributions, and operated with complete independence from any legal issues associated with the club. She turned to the sealed document. It was a payment authorization for Ryan's next 3 months of medication costs. specific, accurate. She did not know how they had the exact figures, though she thought she might be able to guess. Caleb Walker was a man who, when he decided to help someone, helped thoroughly. The amount was exactly what she had been juggling in the spreadsheet she kept on the old laptop. She sat there. She sat there for what felt like a long time and was probably 45 seconds. Then she put the document down on the table and pressed both hands flat on the surface and breathed. Ryan was watching her. "Emma," he said softly. She started, stopped. "I don't know how to." "You don't have to know," he said. "That's the point." She looked at him. His dark eyes steady and warm, the good jacket hanging on the back of his chair because he'd been wearing it when Dennis arrived and hadn't taken it off yet. "I haven't done anything for them," she said. The words came out with more force than she'd planned. Not anger, something more complicated, the specific discomfort of receiving what you have not earned in the transactional sense, the sense her entire life had trained her to operate in. "I gave Caleb one meal. 3 months of medication is..." "Emma," Ryan's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop counting." She looked at him. "You spend your whole life counting," he said. "Counting dollars, counting pills, counting shifts, counting what you can afford to give. You've been counting since you were 18 years old and somebody had to take care of things." He leaned forward. "This is not a transaction. This is a group of people who watched you do something real and who want to do something real back. Let them." She felt her throat do the thing it had done in the coffee shop when Caleb told her what she was that she couldn't see. "I don't know how to do that," she said honestly. "I know you don't," Ryan said, "but you could learn." She picked up the letter and read it again. She read the payment authorization again. She thought about the 11 calls in the dark and the 47 messages and the 214 people on a Saturday morning, and this letter hand-delivered by a man named Dennis, who had first called her because she had reminded him of his sister. She thought about Caleb in the coffee shop, saying people who give kindness must also learn how to receive it. She folded the letter carefully, set it back in the envelope. She picked up her phone and called Caleb. He answered on the third ring. "You got the letter," he said, not a question. "I got the letter," she said. "Caleb, I can't." "You can," he said. "This is not charity. This is not pity. This is people in my family who heard your story and recognize something in it that they want to support. That's what this program does. It has for 11 years. I don't know how to say thank you for something this large," she said. "You already know how," he said. "You've been doing it your whole life. You just do the next right thing. That's the whole answer." She sat with that. "Kay," she said, for the third time in 2 weeks. 3 times she had said that word to him, each time meaning something slightly different, each time meaning something whole. "Emma." His voice had something she hadn't heard from him before, a kind of ease in it, like a weight set down. "You doing all right at the diner?" "Yes," she said. "It's real work, but yes." "Good." "How are you?" she asked. "The injury you've been hiding since the morning you walked into my diner." A pause. She heard something that was almost a laugh, not quite but close. "You noticed that?" "I notice things," she said. "It's what I do." "I'm managing," he said. "Same as always." "Caleb." "Yeah. You should see someone about it," she said. "A doctor, not just manage." A longer pause. "You sound like a person who takes care of people." "I am a person who takes care of people," she said, apparently including difficult ones. That sound again closer to a laugh this time. "I'll think about it," he said. "I'll follow up," she said. She ended the call and then looked at Ryan. 3 months covered," she said. Ryan exhaled, a long one, the kind that released something he had been holding. "Okay," he said, and then quietly, "One thing at a time." "One thing at a time," she agreed. She went back to the diner that afternoon. She had inventory to finish and a staff meeting to run. At 4 o'clock, the first one she had organized herself, a 15-minute standing meeting she had instituted in the first week to give people a place to raise things before they became problems. She had not called it a staff meeting. She had called it a check-in because the word meeting made people brace, and she wanted people to come in soft, ready to talk, rather than ready to deflect. 4 people came to the first one. That had been the previous Thursday. She ran the second one that afternoon. 7 people came. She stood at the counter and asked 3 questions. What's working? What's stuck? What do you need? And she listened to the answers, and wrote them down and said, I'll look into that, or here's what I think we should do, or let me talk to Michael about that. And then she followed up on every single item by the end of the week. Everyone. By the third check-in, Pete came. Pete, who had worked the Riverside Corner kitchen for 7 years and had in that time, as far as Emma could tell, never voluntarily attended a single meeting called by management. He stood at the back with his arms crossed and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Then she asked what stuck, and Pete said, the ordering system. I've been flagging spoilage in the walk-in for 6 months and nobody has adjusted the order quantities. I'm throwing out product every week. Emma wrote it down. I'll have revised quantities to you by Friday, she said. Pete looked at her, uncrossed his arms, the specific body language of a man who had expected to be heard and been prepared to be disappointed and was recalibrating. Okay, he said. She had revised quantities to him by Thursday. The fourth week brought something she hadn't anticipated. Michael called her into the office. She sat down across from him, the way she had sat across from David Collins 11 days earlier, different table, different power dynamic, same diner. I've been watching the floor numbers, Michael said. He turned his laptop around so she could see the screen. A simple graph, 4 weeks of daily revenue. The line moved right and it moved upward. Not dramatically, this wasn't a movie, and real numbers moved in real increments, but consistently. Up. That's partly the story effect, Ma, she said immediately. People coming in because of the article. Some of it, yes, he said. But I had Sandra pull the repeat customer data. People who came in during the first week and came back in the second and third. He tapped the screen. That's not the story effect. That's people deciding this is a place they want to come back to. She looked at the numbers. She let herself actually look at them instead of immediately deflecting. Okay, she said. I'm ending the 30-day trial early, he said. She looked up. You've been doing this job since day one, he said. The trial was a formality. I'm formalizing the position as of today. He pushed a paper across the desk. Title compensation responsibilities. Read it. If it's right, sign it. She read it. She read every word of it carefully the way she read everything important. The title was what they had agreed. The compensation was better than she had expected, not dramatically, but enough to mean something concrete in the spreadsheet she kept on the old laptop. The responsibilities were specific, which she valued, and included the check-in meetings she had started, which meant Michael had noticed them. She picked up the pen. She signed it. Michael Bennett extended his hand across the desk. She shook it. He held it for a moment. I should have known what I had, he said. I'm sorry it took losing it to find out. She looked at him. She thought about the honest answer he had given her on Saturday, the one with the uncertainty built in the one she had decided she could work with. You know now, she said. That's the part that matters. She walked out of the office with the signed copy of her contract in her hand and stood at the edge of the dining room and looked at the floor. Helen Park at her counter stool. Pete's voice from the kitchen. Angela moving between tables with the relaxed efficiency of someone who had found their rhythm. Frank Delgado at table 2, eggs visibly dry, eating without ceremony. She folded the contract and put it in her pocket. She put on her apron, tied it in a double knot. She picked up the coffee pot, and she went to work. Not because the story was over, it wasn't. There were things still unfolding the community program. Ryan's trajectory, Caleb's injury, he was supposed to be getting, looked at the check-in meetings and the staff dynamics, and all the small daily work of building something better than what had been there before. There was a lot of road still ahead. But this moment, this specific moment with the coffee pot in her hand, and the familiar smell of the diner, and the knowledge of the contract in her pocket, and Ryan's medication covered for 3 months, and her father's lesson moving through everything like a current she had been riding her whole life, this moment was a foundation. She had started a chain with a glass of water, and the chain was still going. She refilled Frank's coffee without being asked. He looked up from his eggs. They're good today, he said, meaning the eggs. High praise from Frank, who almost never said anything unless it was to confirm an expectation had been met. Pete's been on point, she said. Frank grunted, which meant he agreed. She moved to the next table, and the next, and the one after that. The diner was warm. The people in it were being treated like people. The woman who managed that was someone who had lost her job for doing the right thing and had not for one single moment stopped believing it had been worth it. Emma Whitmore was exactly where she was supposed to be, And somewhere across the city, Caleb Walker had made an appointment with a doctor. He hadn't told her yet, but he would. Caleb told her about the doctor on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after she had signed the contract. He called while she was doing the weekly order review, the revised quantities she had built into the system after Pete's check-in, commenting a spreadsheet that had already cut waste by nearly 30% in 3 weeks, which Michael had noticed and mentioned twice. She stepped into the back hallway to take the call the way she always did when she needed to actually hear something. "I went," Caleb said. No preamble. Just those 2 words delivered in the direct way she had come to understand was simply how he communicated things that mattered to him. She stopped moving. "The doctor." "Yeah." And, a pause. Not long, but waited. "Surgery," he said. "Old injury in the hip that I've been compensating for since about 2019. Apparently compensation has its limits." She leaned against the wall. "When?" "6 weeks. They want to schedule it before the damage compounds further." Another pause. "The doc said I'd been running on about 60% function for the last 2 years. He seemed personally offended by that." "He should be," Emma said. "Emma, you should be too," she said. "Caleb, you walked into my diner barely able to stand and you said nothing. And I noticed because I noticed things, and you have been managing this alone for years." The silence that followed was a specific kind, the kind that happened when someone had been named accurately and wasn't sure whether to be defensive or grateful. "I manage things," he said finally. The plainness of it was almost its own kind of confession. "I know you do," she said. "So do I, and I'm learning with significant help from you. I might add that managing things alone is not the same as managing things well." He was quiet. "Who's going to be with you?" she asked. "After the surgery." "The chapter will handle it." "That's not what I asked. Who specifically?" "Which person?" Another pause. Longer. "Marcus said he'd stay the first week." "Good," she said. "Tell Marcus I said thank you." She pushed off the wall. "And Caleb, tell me how it goes. Don't manage this quietly on your end and leave me guessing." "You're going to follow up regardless," he said. "Correct," she said. "So you might as well just tell me." That sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. She had decided she was going to keep making that sound happen for as long as she was able. It seemed like the kind of sound that hadn't had enough room in his life. "I'll tell you," he said. She went back to the order spreadsheet. She sat at the desk in the back office, her desk now with her notepad and her 3 pens and the framed photo of her and Ryan that she had brought from home in her second week, and she looked at the numbers on the screen and felt the fullness of everything that was happening simultaneously. Caleb and the surgery, Ryan and the medication covered, the diner and the check-ins and the steadily climbing repeat customer rate. The contract in her pocket that was now in a drawer at home filed carefully between Ryan's medical paperwork and the utility bills. Her father had told her that the right thing had a momentum of its own, that you didn't push it, you just started it. She was beginning to understand what he meant in a way she hadn't been able to when it was only a principle, when it was just a sentence on a porch with fireflies. Now it was a living thing. She could feel it moving. She went back to work. The first community breakfast happened 6 weeks after Caleb's surgery. She had been thinking about it since almost the beginning, since the second week when the check-in meetings had started working, and she had begun to understand the shape of what the diner could be beyond just a place to eat. She had brought it to Michael in her 4th week before the contract was even formally signed, the same way she brought everything to him clearly, specifically with the practical framework already sketched. "Once a month," she had said. "First Saturday, open to the community-free breakfast for anyone who comes, funded by a combination of our own contribution and donations from outside organizations who want to participate. We partner with local veterans groups, neighborhood associations, anyone who wants to be involved. We run it here with our staff and we build it over time." Michael had looked at the number she had sketched on the notepad. He had looked at her. "How long have you been thinking about this?" "Since before I signed the contract," she said honestly. He had laughed, actually laughed, which she had not heard from him before, and it turned out to be a good sound. "All right," he said. "First Saturday of next month. Let's do it." Caleb was 3 weeks into his recovery when she called him about the breakfast. "I want you there," she said. "Well, to make a statement, not for optics, because you should be there. It wouldn't exist without you." It exists because of you, he said. His voice was slightly different than it had been. The surgery had done something, released something, and even through the phone, she could hear that some layer of managed tension was gone from his voice. What remained was the same directness, the same quietness, but lighter, like a room after the windows had been opened. It exists because of a glass of water, she said, which started with you walking in. Fair, he said. I'll be there. Marcus can drive you, she said. Marcus is not going to drive me. Marcus told Dennis, who told me that he has been trying to get you to accept a ride somewhere for 4 years. He will absolutely drive you. A pause. You talk to Dennis. Dennis calls me every 2 weeks to check in, she said. He thinks I don't know it's also to report back to you. Silence. Caleb. Yeah. I know, she said simply, and I appreciate it. Tell Marcus I'd like him to drive you to the breakfast. She heard the exhale, the specific exhale of a man who had decided it was not worth arguing about. Fine, he said. Thank you, she said. The first community breakfast drew 43 people. Emma had expected maybe 30. She had planned for 50 because she always planned above expectation and below hope, which was a system that had served her well. 43 landed exactly in the space she had prepared for. They came from the neighborhood, people she recognized from years of diner shifts, regulars who had watched the story unfold with the particular investment of those adjacent to something significant. They came from the veterans group that Michael had connected with through a friend who knew a friend. They came from the community college down the road, 3 administrators who had seen the article and reached out. They came from a women's shelter 2 blocks over, whose director had called the diner directly and asked if there was room. There was always room. Emma had built that into the structure from the beginning. Dennis arrived early to help set up. He appeared at the door at 7 a.m. with 2 other men from the chapter, all 3 of them in the same leather vests they had worn on the Saturday of the ride, and they moved chairs and tables with the quiet efficiency of people who understood practical work. Pete cooked. He cooked like a man who had been waiting for an occasion worthy of his full effort. He had come in 2 hours before the breakfast started, which Emma had not asked him to do, and which he had not mentioned he was doing until she arrived at 6:30 to find the kitchen already in full operation. She had stood at the kitchen window and looked at him. Pete, she said. Morning, he said, not looking up. You didn't have to come in this early. I know, he said. Listen, she had learned in 2 months of working beside Pete that this was his version of a full explanation. She accepted it and went to work. Angela was there and 2 other servers and a volunteer from the veterans group who turned out to have worked a breakfast line before and slid into the rhythm of the floor without needing to be told anything twice, which Emma made a note of. Caleb arrived at 8:15. He came through the door moving differently than he had the first time, not the careful, managed movement of a man compensating for pain. He was hiding, but something more deliberate, more present. He was using a cane, which she suspected he would be done with inside of another month, based on his particular impatience with things that implied limitation. But for now it was there and he was using it without apology, which she considered progress of a specific kind. Marcus was beside him. Marcus, who had driven him and who gave Emma a look that said, you were right, and I'm never admitting that out loud, and Emma returned a look that said, I know, and you're welcome. She crossed the floor to meet them. Caleb looked at the room, at the tables full of people, veterans and neighbors and shelter residents and college administrators and 2 members of the chapter, and Frank Delgado, who had arrived early as always and was eating eggs that were correctly dry for the first time in several months. He looked at Pete, visible through the kitchen window, moving with full effort purpose. He looked at the handwritten sign Angela had made that morning and taped to the door, which read simply, Everyone welcome. No exceptions. He looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he looked at Emma. She saw it happen in his face, the thing she had been watching for without knowing she was watching for it. The thing that happened when a person who had stopped expecting the world to be decent encountered evidence that it still could be. The compound emotion of relief and grief into something she could only describe as the particular ache of having been right to hope when hoping had felt dangerous. He didn't say anything immediately. She didn't make him. You built this, he said finally. We built it, she said. You, me, Dennis, Marcus, Pete, 214 people on a Saturday morning. James Harrow, who wrote an honest article, Michael Bennett, who listened, Ryan, who told me to stop counting. She paused. It took a lot of people. He shook his head slightly. It started with 1. It started with you walking in, she said. Don't edit yourself out of your own story. He looked at her. That steadiness she had learned, that particular quality of attention that she understood now was how he showed people they mattered to him. You're better at this than you know, he said. I'm learning, she said, same as everyone else. She guided him to the table she had reserved near the window, not the corner because he had his back to the wall already, and sometimes you needed to face the room instead. And Marcus sat down across from him, and the two of them fell into the easy quiet of people who had been alongside each other long enough that silence was comfortable. Dennis materialized at her elbow. 7 more people just came in, he said. I think we need another table. Closet by the back office, she said, the folding one. He went. She turned back to the room. It was full. Not just in the physical sense, chairs occupied, plates moving. The sound of conversation layered into a comfortable density. Full in the other sense. The sense her father would have recognized. The sense of people who were being treated like people responding to that treatment by being in turn more fully themselves. More open. More present. More willing to speak to the stranger at the next table instead of maintaining the careful urban distance that was the default. The woman from the shelter was talking to one of the veterans. Not about anything heavy. Emma caught a fragment about a television show they both apparently watched, and they were laughing. 2 people who would likely never have sat at the same table under any other circumstances, sharing a laugh over scrambled eggs on a Saturday morning. Emma stood at the edge of the room and felt the weight of what she was seeing. This was the answer to the question she had asked Michael Bennett on the day of the ride. What happens when everyone forgets the story? What happens on an ordinary Tuesday in an empty diner? This was what happened. Slowly and perfectly, one Saturday at a time, you built something that didn't require the story to sustain it. You built something that had its own reason to exist, its own heat, its own gravity. You built something that pulled people toward each other, not because of a dramatic event, but because the environment made it natural to be decent. She had not known she was building this when she folded her apron and walked out of the diner 6 weeks ago. She had only known she was doing what was right, and the right thing her father had told her had a momentum of its own. She went back to work. The 3rd community breakfast 2 months later drew 112 people. The diner held 54 at full capacity. Emma had long since arranged overflow into the space next door, a vacant storefront that Michael had quietly secured a temporary use agreement for after the 2nd breakfast made the capacity problem obvious. She had folded tables, borrowed chairs from the Veterans Hall, and organized a system where people rotated through in waves so that no one waited more than 15 minutes. Ryan helped at the 3rd one. He had asked to, and she had not said no. Not even the part of her that reflexively wanted to protect him from anything that required sustained effort. He stood at the door for 3 hours and greeted every person who came in, and he did it with the warmth and focus of someone who had grown up watching Emma do the same thing and had absorbed it by proximity without ever performing it. At one point, she watched him talking to a young man, maybe 17, who had come in alone. Someone from the neighborhood she didn't recognize, with the specific self-consciousness of a teenager navigating something unfamiliar. Ryan talked to him for 4 minutes, found out his name was Jesse, found out he was interested in culinary programs at the community college, and by the end of the conversation had gotten Pete to come out of the kitchen for 5 minutes to talk to the kid directly. Pete and Jesse talked for 12 minutes. Emma was watching without being obvious about it. When Pete went back to the kitchen, he looked at her through the window. She raised her eyebrows. He gave one nod, the specific nod that meant something had happened worth noting. She found out later that Pete had told Jesse to come back the following Monday and he would show him the kitchen and what a real breakfast service looked like from the inside. Jesse had come. He had come back the following Monday after that and the one after that. By the 5th community breakfast, he was washing dishes as a volunteer and Pete was teaching him plating. That was the chain. That was how it worked. Not dramatically, not all at once. One breakfast conversation at a time. One person talking to one other person who happened to be in the same room because a young woman had given a tired man a glass of water a year ago. Emma thought about this sometimes. She tried not to think about it too often because there was a version of this kind of thinking that became self-congratulatory, and she was not interested in that version. But sometimes in the quiet moments, closing the diner at night, counting the day's numbers, walking to the bus, she let herself trace the chain. Not to feel proud of it, just to understand it. to really understand what her father had meant when he said that a good deed didn't end with the deed itself. Caleb came to the sixth breakfast without the cane. He walked in the door and she saw immediately that it was gone, and she kept her face steady and didn't make anything of it because she knew him well enough by now to know that the thing he needed most around any evidence of recovery was for it to be treated as normal. As expected, as simply the next thing. "You're moving better," she said. "PT worked," he said. "I know, Marcus told Dennis and Dennis told me." He stopped, looked at her. "You've built a very effective information network." "I pay attention to people," she said. "It turns out they tell you things." She handed him a coffee. Black, no question. "There's someone I want you to meet." She led him across the room to where Ryan was standing, and she watched the two of them meet for the first time. Really meet face to face, not the distant knowledge of each other that they had carried through the months. Ryan shook Caleb's hand and held it for a moment with the extra beat that meant the handshake was carrying more weight than a handshake normally did. "My sister talks about you," Ryan said. "She talks about you too," Caleb said. "Yeah, but she talks about me because she's required to," Ryan said. "I'm her brother. She talks about you because she chooses to." Caleb looked at Emma. She kept her expression neutral, which required some effort. "He's not wrong," she said. Caleb looked back at Ryan. "She won't let me get away with anything," he said. Ryan grinned. The real one, full and wide, the one that looked exactly like their father's. "She never has," he said. "Not once in her life." The three of them stood there for a moment, and Emma felt the particular wholeness of having two people she loved because she had come to understand somewhere in the last months that Caleb Walker was someone she loved, in the way that you loved anyone who had been honest with you during a hard time, who had seen you clearly and responded to what they saw, rather than what was convenient standing in the same room she had built. Not the same diner she had worked in, the same room she had built. There was a difference. She felt it. The sixth breakfast was the one where James Harrow came back. He arrived without calling first, which she noted, and stood at the door for a moment looking at the room before she found him. He was carrying a small notebook, same as before, and he had the expression of a man who has been told a story is developing and has come to see how. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Emma," she said. She had told him 3 times now. "You could have called." "I know," he said, "but some things are better seen than described." He looked around the room at the overflow into the next space, at Pete visible through the kitchen window, at Jesse who was now moving between tables with the beginning of a natural floor rhythm, at Ryan at the door talking to a woman with 2 small children who had come in looking slightly uncertain and was now looking slightly less so, at Caleb and Marcus at the corner table, Caleb without the cane, both of them talking to an older veteran who Emma had been seeing at every breakfast since the second one. "You've grown this," Harrow said. "We've grown it," she said. "How many people today?" 107 so far, she said. "More coming." He wrote something in his notebook. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to regardless," she said. He almost smiled. "Is this what you planned when you agreed to come back? Was this what you had in your head?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything that deserved honesty. "No," she said. "I had check-in meetings and revised order quantities and better communication between staff. I had practical things." The breakfast came later. The breakfast came from the check-in meetings, actually, from listening to people tell me what they needed and following the thread of that. So it grew organically. "Everything real grows organically," she said. "The things you force into shape from the outside break. The things you tend properly grow their own way." He wrote that down. She watched him write it and felt no particular need to retract it or soften it. It was true, and she had earned the right to say it. "Second article?" she asked. "If you'll let me," he said. She thought about it. She thought about the conditions she had set the first time the story is not about me. Nothing about Ryan, and whether those conditions still held. Ryan's situation was still private. That had not changed. But the story was no longer about a woman who lost her job. The story was about what had grown from that, which was bigger than any one person and could be told without centering any one person. And if it brought more people to the breakfast table, then the telling served the purpose. "Same conditions," she said. "Same conditions," he agreed. She left him to walk the room. The things she didn't say to Harrow, the things she was still working out how to say to anyone, including herself, was that the 6 months since the morning she had lost her job had taught her something she had not known she needed to learn. She had known her father's lesson intellectually. She had believed it and carried it and acted on it her entire adult life. But there was a level of it she had not accessed because the lesson had only ever traveled in one direction for her. She gave. That was the direction she knew. She gave care and attention and $15 and her own last resources, and she carried the people she loved, and she showed up and she did not stop. But she had not known how to receive. She had not known what it felt like to be on the other end of the lesson, to be the person sitting in the corner with the glass of water appearing in front of you when you hadn't expected it, to be the person the change started with rather than the person who kept it going. Caleb had put her on both ends of it, and that doubling that full circuit of the lesson was what she had been trying to understand for 6 months. The thing about receiving kindness she had found was that it didn't make you smaller. She had been afraid of that unconsciously for reasons she was still working out some deep conviction that needing things was a weakness, that accepting help was a diminishment, that the value of her was in what she gave and not in what she was. She had been afraid that letting people help her would reduce her. It had done the opposite. It had given her a more complete understanding of what she was doing when she helped other people. Not just the giving of a thing, but the full weight of what it meant to be seen, to have someone look at you in a moment of need and respond to what they saw rather than what was convenient for them. That was the gift, not the water, not the $15, the seeing. She understood that now in her bones in a way she hadn't before, and it made everything she did, the check-ins, the breakfast, the way she moved through the diner floor, the way she listened to Pete and Angela and Ryan and Caleb. It made all of it more complete, more fully itself. She was still learning. She would be for a long time. But she was learning. The conversation happened a year after the morning she had lost her job. She had been thinking of the anniversary without planning to. The mind found these markers, whether you asked it to or not, and she had been at the diner early the way she sometimes still was, on mornings when thinking felt more productive, in the familiar smell of coffee and the pre-opening quiet. She was at the counter with her notepad when she heard the door. She looked up. Caleb was standing in the entrance. She had not expected him. He had not told her he was coming. He stood in the doorway the same way he had stood in it a year ago. Same frame, same leather vest, same weathered face. But nothing else was the same. He was standing straight, no compensated lean, no managed pain. He was present in his body in a way he had not been a year ago, and she could see it from across the room. She felt the year collapse between that moment and this one. The distance between the tired man in the doorway and the person standing there now, the distance she had traveled and the distance he had traveled and the distance they had somehow traveled alongside each other without ever quite naming that was what they were doing. She set down her notepad. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said. "I know," he said. He walked to the counter. He sat down, not at the corner table, at the counter beside her, which was different, which was its own kind of statement. "I wanted to see it," he said, before the day started, just to see it quiet. She looked at the room with him, the 10 tables, the 8 stools, the pie case with 3 kinds of pie, the counter with the coffee station she still technically maintained because some habits were worth keeping, the sign by the door that Angela had made for the first breakfast and that Emma had asked her to keep up permanently. Everyone welcome. No exceptions. "It's the same place," she said. "No," he said. "It's really not." She looked at him. "No," she agreed, "it's really not." He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man who has something to say and is choosing his words with the care she had come to associate with the things that mattered most to him. "When I walked in here a year ago," he said, "I had been writing for 3 days. I had not slept well in about a week. The hip was," he paused, "bad. I was not in a good place, and not just physically." He kept his eyes on the counter in front of him. There's a thing that happens when you spend enough years being the person rooms go quiet for. You start to believe that's what you are, the thing rooms go quiet for. You stop expecting anything different. You stop expecting. He stopped. You stop expecting someone to just hand you a glass of water. Emma was very still. "She just handed me a glass of water," he said. "She didn't ask who I was. She didn't look at my vest and calculate whether I was worth the trouble. She just handed me a glass of water and looked at me like I was a person and that was it. He stopped again. Do you know what that does to someone who stopped expecting it? She thought about Harrow's line. Basic dignity has become rare enough to be remarkable. She thought about what it meant to be on the receiving end of something you had given up hoping for. Tell me, she said quietly. He looked at her, finally directly at her, the full weight of his attention. It broke something open, he said. Something I had been keeping shut for a long time because keeping it shut was the only way I knew how to keep going. And once it was open, he shook his head. You can't close it again. I didn't want to, but it meant I had to do something with it. So you made calls, she said. So I made calls, he said. And my brothers rode and you got your job back. He paused. And then you built all of this. He looked around the room once more. And now I'm sitting here a year later and there's a kid in your kitchen learning to cook and a veterans group that meets here every second Thursday and a community breakfast that fed 130 people last month. And all of it started because you walked in, she said, because you saw me, he said. That's different. She held his look. It is different, she said. You're right. He nodded slowly, looked back at the counter. I had stopped expecting people to see me as a person, he said. The same words he had been building toward, the core of it. I know, she said. I could see that. That's the thing, he said. I know you could. That's the thing I've never been able to fully explain to people. You could see it. Not the vest, not the patches, not the version of me that rooms decided on before I sat down. You looked past all of that and you saw a tired man who needed a meal. I saw a person, she said simply. Yeah, he said. You gave me something I thought the world had taken away. She waited. Hope, he said. One word. Quiet. But the weight of it filled the entire room. Emma felt it land in her chest, in the place where all the hard things and the true things went. Where her father's lessons lived, and Ryan's face when he was having a good day, and Pete's single nod of acknowledgement, and the sound that was almost a laugh from a man who hadn't had enough room for laughing. She didn't try to respond immediately. She sat with it the way it deserved to be sat with. Then she said, You gave me the same thing. He looked at her. I had been carrying everything alone for so long that I had forgotten carrying it alone wasn't the only option, she said. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone show up. You reminded me. She paused. 214 people reminded me. But you started it. He was quiet for a moment. Then so we're even. We're even, she said, and almost smiled, except I'm still monitoring your recovery via Dennis. I know you are, he said, and you're still having Marcus check in on Ryan's appointments. A pause. He mentioned that. He tells me things, she said. People do when you pay attention to it. Caleb looked at her with the full steadiness of his attention, and she looked back with the same. Two people who had met at a corner table over a glass of water and had in the year that followed built something neither of them had planned and both of them had needed. What's next, he said. She thought about it. She thought about Jesse in the kitchen and the 130 people at the last breakfast and the veterans group on second Thursdays and the women's shelter director who had called last week about expanding the partnership. She thought about the notepad on the counter with the list of what came next because there was always a list. There would always be a list that was simply who she was. More of this, she said, better, bigger, more people at the table. She looked at him. You kupase. Same, he said. The program is expanding. 3 new chapters participating in the Family Assistance Fund. He paused. We're looking at a formal partnership with the veterans group. I know, she said. Dennis told me. He looked at the ceiling briefly in the expression of a man who had accepted that certain things were simply the way they were. Of course he did. She picked up her coffee cup, held it the way she always held it, 2 hands grounded. Caleb? Yeah. Thank you, she said, for not forgetting. He shook his head. I told you I couldn't have if I tried. The diner was starting to wake up. She could hear Pete arriving in the kitchen, the particular sequence of sounds that meant Pete was putting on his apron and beginning the prep sequence he had run every morning for 7 years. She could hear Angela's voice in the back. She could see the light through the windows changing from the gray of early morning into something thinner and sharper and cleaner. The light that meant the day was properly starting. Emma set down her coffee cup. She untied her apron and retied it with the double knot. She picked up her notepad. She stood up. Same time next year, Caleb said. Something in his voice was lighter than it had been even 5 minutes ago, some final release of a thing that had been held. Every morning, she said, "This is my diner," and she went to work. She went to work in the place she had lost and earned back and built into something that fed 130 people a month and gave a teenager a future in a kitchen and gave veterans a place to be known and gave strangers a table where they could be for an hour on a Saturday morning, simply people among people. She went to work in the place that had started with one woman's choice to see another person clearly and had become through the long and unmapped momentum of that one clear-eyed act more than she had known to imagine. She had not set out to change anything. She had set out to do the right thing. And she had learned in the most thorough and complete and irreversible way a person could learn something, that the right thing done once in one moment for one tired man with a glass of water and $15 and her father's lesson steady in her chest was never truly finished. It kept going. It kept going because kindness, when it was real, when it came from seeing, rather than from strategy, from humanity, rather than from calculation, carried its own momentum, its own direction, its own gathering force. A person who chooses to do good is never truly standing alone. Emma Whitmore had always believed that. Now she knew it was true.